As we've seen, the parliamentary fate of the Labour government 30 years ago was sealed by a single vote. Much rested on the arithmetic of the whips and on tortuous negotiation, even arm-twisting behind the scenes. But the debate on the floor of the Commons that evening was also vital to securing last-minute support. Now, although cameras were not allowed in the chamber until 1989, as we saw earlier in Tonight, microphones were. So the debate was captured for posterity as a sound recording, and we've added some illustration for this broadcast. Stay with us now and enjoy the highlights from the night the government fell.
Order. Before we embark on this debate, I want to give a cautionary word to the House. Everyone knows that the division will be called at 10 o'clock. I want to make it quite clear, therefore, that if the division bells fail in any part of the premises, or even if lifts fail, I shall be most unlikely to order a division to be held again if members then complain they have been unable to reach the lobby in time. In my view, and this has happened before, in my view it is the responsibility of honourable members to make sure that they're present or near the chamber in advance of the time for the division. I also remind the House that the division will not be concluded until the numbers have been announced from the chair. Mrs. Thatcher.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. The timing of the motion, Mr. Speaker, arises from the government's inept handling of the results of the referendum on the Scotland and Wales Acts. When we thought it was a time for decision, the Prime Minister thought it was a time for talks. As he'd previously spurned them, we were not wholly convinced that the reasons he advanced represented the whole truth. And we were similarly sceptical when he expressed his willingness to consider modifications to the present Act, presumably by an amending bill, or a totally different measure. From his days as Home Secretary, we know that the Right Honourable Gentleman takes what might be charitably described as a flexible view of constitutional niceties. But even he might find it difficult to arrange for major changes on a subject like this to pass through all their stages in the 3 working months at most which are left to this House. Any such changes must be for a new Parliament. The only decision the Prime Minister really took was to delay a decision. And for reasons which I find difficult to understand, Mr. Speaker, such momentous delays seem these days to be accompanied by a ministerial broadcast. The good government of the United Kingdom and its unity is a matter of supreme importance to this House, wherever we may sit. The new proposals are not for a dying Parliament, but for a new one. Mr. Speaker, the essence of the motion this afternoon is that the government has failed the nation, that it's lost credibility, and that it is time for it to go. Unless the Prime Minister should advance his customary explanation of failure, namely his political inheritance, may I point out that his and this government's inheritance was from a Labour government led by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Huyton. This Parliament was elected in October 1974. By then, Labour had been in office for 7 months. They'd plenty of time to assess the economic state of the country. The election of October 1974 gave them the opportunity to state it clearly. They did. The Chancellor claimed inflation was down to 8.4% on his chosen basis. Later, when it went soaring up, how did he explain it? Not by any talk about the previous Conservative government's policies. That excuse hadn't been invented. On BBC Radio 4 analysis in October 1976, the Chancellor said, "I think it's fair to say that inflation went up much more after the October election than I or anyone else expected, because the trades unions didn't at the time observe the social contract as they'd defined it earlier in the year." Indeed, when the Chancellor was pressed, he stressed the point and went even further. "I think it's fair to say," he said, "that wage inflation was the main reason for the runaway inflation in the months that followed the October 1974 election." Nor was it only inflation that had been beaten by October 1974, according to the then government. The Chancellor said on the 24th of September, after 6 months in office, "I am certain we can get through the whole of next year with well under 1 million unemployed." Not only did he not get through 1975 with under 1 million unemployed, he did not get through 1976 or 1977 or 1978. So it's no good the Prime Minister now saying that the disasters since October 1974 were the fault of the Conservative government. In October 1974, the Labour government took full responsibility for the state of the economy. But then, of course, Mr. Speaker, let us be fair to the previous Prime Minister. He was prepared to take responsibility. But let us take the Prime Minister's own objectives as the tests by which he should be judged. He set them out in the first censure debate, which took place in June 1976. His first objective was to overcome inflation. Apparently, the Chancellor of the Exchequer had not performed that feat by the time the last election took place. Be that as it may, the fact is that this government has been responsible for doubling the prices in the housewife's shopping basket. Now, far from being overcome, inflation is rising again and will rise for the coming months. Indeed, on the Healy basis, it is already into double figures. And it was on that basis that the Treasurer gave us the figure 13.3%. The Prime Minister's second objective was to make inroads into the unacceptably high level of unemployment and to reduce it by 1979, this was in 1976, to 3%. Today it is double that figure. On that, too, the Prime Minister has failed. And his third objective, to achieve a high output, high productivity, high wage economy based on full employment. But only a week or so ago, we had news of the worst level of manufacturing output this decade. And a few days ago, we had a chilling reminder that not only are our industrial competitors ahead of us in output, but they are pulling away from us at what seems an ever faster rate. For every extra unit of output from a worker in British industry over the last 5 years, our least efficient competitor, the Italians, produce 2, the Americans more than 3, the French 4.5, the Germans 5.5, and the Japanese more than 6. In the same world conditions as we face, their governments seem to be able to generate the conditions for success. This government has failed. Those were the Prime Minister's objectives. His strategy was the social contract, and then a new social contract to enable us to proceed with confidence in the years ahead. That strategy has totally collapsed, as many of us thought it would, but we were regularly vilified for saying so. The fourth phase of that contract, the 5%, was never accepted by those for whom it was intended. It resulted in creating the very confrontation that the Prime Minister boasted he had replaced by cooperation. And the people witnessed the spectacle of a government abdicating its authority to strike committees. So the Prime Minister's objectives were not achieved, and his strategy failed. Had his dream of new economic strength come about, the Prime Minister said he would use it to strengthen our position abroad, to ensure a peaceful solution to world problems through the use of the United Nations, and to strengthen Europe's voice. And the reality, rarely in the post-war period can our standing in the world have been lower or our defences weaker. The international position is graver than at any time since the 1930s. The difference is that Britain is now a nation on the sidelines. In one diagnosis, however, I agree with the Prime Minister. Influence overseas depends on economic strength at home, and a nation which can't manage its own affairs properly is not in a position to give advice to those who can. Mr. Speaker, there are, I believe, four main things which have contributed to Britain's decline in the last 5 years. First, far too little attention has been given to wealth creation and far too much to wealth distribution. So what has to be done? Top of the list must be a policy of incentive tax cuts. There's widespread agreement on this. There has been for years. The trouble is the government just doesn't do it. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has sympathy with the tax position of management, but sympathy is as far as it goes. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the government's resident example of congenial and civilised man, is much more expansive. In a television interview, he said, "The rate of tax on salaried talent is very high in this country. The putting of this right is a massive problem that will take a little time. I believe this to be a #1 priority in the Chancellor's mind for future action. That's my own view. It ought to be." But nothing was done. Even the Prime Minister tells his colleagues, if you talk to people in the factories and in the clubs, they all want to pay less tax. But pronouncement is not followed by policy. And lack of that policy leads to a hemorrhage of talent in management and a resentment amongst the skilled. The Jeremiahs sometimes say that the ordinary people of this country have lost the will to work. But let them work in other countries where they're no longer frustrated by British tax rates, and they can outproduce and outsell our competitors. Vital as tax cuts are to restore management morale and that of the skilled worker, they're also needed to encourage the growth of small business. Because it's mainly from that sector that we shall get the new jobs, tomorrow's jobs that we need for our young people. Now, no government can protect yesterday's jobs forever. It can postpone the day of reckoning, but it cannot escape it. It can ease the transition from one job to another. But this government tries to protect yesterday's jobs without facilitating the growth of new industries. That's a policy for penury and unemployment, in which the regions suffer most of all. For wealth creation, a different attitude to profits is also required. Profits are pitifully low, and as a result, several companies have announced cutbacks in investment plans, ICI and Hoover, for example. The alternative of borrowing to invest is precluded for many businesses by the continuing prohibitive interest rates, which are the consequences of this government's policies. All our hopes for better homes for families, for better schools for our children, for better pensions for retirement, for better health service, all of them depend for their fulfillment on our ability to create the wealth to pay for these things. Fail in that, and we fail in all the other things. The government has failed, and the social services of other nations have consequently overtaken ours. That, I believe, is the first reason for the decline. The second reason is that the government has concentrated far too much power in the hands of the centralized state and left too little with the individual citizen. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, if the government had assumed less power over communities and individuals, the remoter areas in the United Kingdom would have less reason to worry about the power coming from Westminster. Although socialism is about centralised planning and control, even some members of Her Majesty's government have from time to time begun to have doubts about the wisdom of the policy. A former distinguished member, the late Anthony Crossland, in a lecture in October 1975 said, "But we must take seriously the fears about the growth of state power, especially given the penchant of some socialists for the continual spawning of giant new institutions under centralized control." He continued, "We should not be in the business of creating giant leviathans manned by armies of bureaucrats." What a pity he and his colleagues did not take his advice. It was added to by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, who said in Birmingham this year, "We have to acknowledge that the decentralized private sector has outperformed the old-fashioned concepts of centralized planning." But of course, such wisdom marks him out as a man who the left must try to oust from his own constituency. But his views are ours, and we believe they're in tune with the nation. Not, however, with the actions of this government. For centralization continues, and it even increases. For example, the Price Commission, with its investigatory powers, descends upon even the most successful companies to pronounce on their efficiency, having had no experience in that kind of business themselves. The Concordat demands more planning agreements between government and companies, yet another hindrance to the job of seeking new markets and producing the goods. In one industry alone, the chemical industry, plant worth millions of pounds would be lying idle today if companies had based their investment on totally unreal market projections put forward by the government and trade unions. The Concordat also foreshadowed the direction by government of savings in pension and insurance funds, away from the object of providing for pensioners and insurance holders to the objects of industrial strategy. But if the object of that strategy is to back success, the companies concerned will have no difficulty in getting finance. If it's to back losers, it would be better for pensioners if their money were not invested that way. But perhaps the most debilitating and damaging aspect of their policy of increasing state power is that supporters of the government positively believe in taking a higher proportion of the national income away from the taxpayer and letting the government decide on how it should be spent. In no way have they been reticent about it. What the policy boils down to is this: that the state should take more tax from the citizen and provide him with his basic standard of living according to what the government decides he needs. That would leave the citizen only less essential things to be found from the pay packet. A sort of pocket money society policy. And these things are put forward in the name of social responsibility, social morality, social progress, and so on. What they forget is that we shall never have social responsibility unless we first have responsible individuals. And how does responsibility grow if decisions on personal property and savings are constantly transferred to the state? We shall never have social morality without having individuals of moral worth, and that cannot be attained except by exercising choice and not taking it away. We shall never get social progress except through the efforts of individuals with a sense of purpose. Part of the reason for our decline is that Britain now shows every sign of a destruction of individual and productive energy, which is wholly exceptional on any comparison with those European states most like ourselves. Those are the first two reasons: insufficient attention to the creation of wealth and too much concentration on increasing state control. I believe that the third reason for our problems is this: that the balance between power and responsibility in the trade union movement needs to be restored. And so does the balance of obligations between the employer and the employee. I've dealt on the immediate measures needed before, and will not enlarge on them today. But I say this: because of the ties of the Labour Party with the trade union movement, because the trade union movement effectively controls the conferences and executive of the Labour Party, and because it provides some 90% of the finance of the Labour Party, I don't believe a Labour government will ever make the necessary changes. The right honourable gentleman could have taken action with our support. He chose not to do so. He's the prisoner of his own history in this matter. The unions were his stepping stones to power, and they know it. So be it. Changes will have to be made by another government, and I believe they will have the overwhelming support of the people, including the majority of trade union members. On the economic side, we have to break through the prosperity barrier in manufacturing industry. We can only do so if, through good management, proper incentives and cooperation, we are able to cut restrictive practices and raise output per person. Mr. Speaker, if we'd spent half as much time on policies to raise output as we have on policies to increase pay, we should have a higher standard of work and hence a higher standard of living now. The truth is that in the countries of our main industrial competitors, union and government policies have combined to do far better for union members than is the case in Britain. The fourth point is one which pervades the whole life of the community: the rule of law. This government has shown insufficient support for the rule of law in this country. The most cogent example of that proposition came from the Lord President in 1977 when he said, "It does so happen to be the case that if the freedom of the people of this country, and especially the rights of trade unions, if those precious things in the past had been left to the good sense and fair-mindedness of judges, we would have precious few freedoms in this country." Some of us were so appalled at what the Lord President had said that we tackled the Prime Minister about it in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister said, "Frankly, I don't think he went far enough." They set the tone. Events of the winter produced the new phrase for the Attorney General, lawful intimidation. The Prime Minister and his ministers take that view of the law. It's not surprising that others will follow. And of course, it was not long before one of the trade union leaders did. He said, "My advice is to carry on picketing. I cannot see union members accepting the court decision. They will inevitably act in such numbers that the authorities will have to use football stadia for detention centres." That is the rule of the mob and not the rule of law. And it ought to be condemned by every institution and minister in the land. As it is, the people have identified the weakness. far quicker than the government. Go anywhere in the country and the demand will be for two things: less tax and more law and order. The phrase law and order refers not only to vandalism and violence, although that's uppermost in many people's minds. It also refers to something else. It means that our citizens expect and are not getting an ordered or orderly society. They expect the rubbish to be cleared, the schools to be open, and the hospitals to be functioning, and they are not. They expect each man and woman to rise to his obligations in an ordinary and decent way. They expect bargains to be kept between trade unions and employers as well. And they expect ministers to support them in those views. In the recent closure of schools, the authorities did not support the law-abiding citizen or his children. It was the citizens who had to go to the courts when their children were denied access to the schools. It was the law which upheld the parents when they could not persuade the council or ministers to help. The Secretary of State for Education took the view, astonishing as it may seem, that the council had not failed to discharge their duty. The Right Honourable Lady has been prepared to pass new laws to close good schools. It's a pity she's not been as eager to use existing laws to keep present schools open. At least there was a law to invoke. There are many cases now when the interests or livelihood of a person can be changed or taken away and there is no remedy at law whatsoever. That is the legacy of this government. After 5 years, it's not surprising that our people want the benefit of having a government which regards the maintenance of the rule of law as the foremost of its tasks. There we have the record and some of the reasons for failure. Each crisis, industrial or financial, has been met by short-term measures, but there's been no serious attempt to deal with the underlying problems. On the contrary, they are worse. The government has doubled prices, doubled dole queues, doubled debt, diminished our defences, and undermined public respect and confidence in the law. But I believe that this is not only a failure of policies, but of the whole philosophy on which they are based. The philosophy which elevates the state, dwarfs the individual, and enlarges the bureaucracy. Across the Western world, the tide is turning against it, and soon the same thing will happen here. I return, Mr. Speaker, to the occasion for the motion. It's a motion which arose out of a constitutional matter affecting the whole House. Honourable members from all sides made an eminently reasonable request to the Prime Minister that he should determine the matters outstanding from the referendum by the end of this month. He deliberately chose not to make a matching response, but to try to manipulate the situation for his own ends. He can have no grounds whatsoever for anger if others judge it for the manoeuvre that it was. Nor in view of the government's conduct of parliamentary matters during the last 3 years can he complain if his present action is dubbed characteristic. It's not unusual for minority governments to carry on for a considerable period of time as this one has. What condemns the Prime Minister now is the justified feeling that the substance of matters before the House takes second place to the survival of the government. That feeling is widespread, and it robs this government and the Prime Minister of authority, credibility, and dignity. The only way to renew the authority of parliamentary government is to seek a fresh mandate from the people and to seek it quickly. And we challenge the government to do so before this day is through.
The question is that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady began by recalling the circumstances in which this afternoon's vote of confidence is taking place. As she said, it follows directly from my proposal last week that in the light of the results of the devolution referenda, and especially because of the result in Scotland, that there should be a limited period of discussion between the parties before Parliament debated the orders that would repeal the Scotland and Wales Acts once and for all. The Right Honourable Lady last Thursday didn't immediately reject the proposal. She waited. She waited, not immediately, not at question time, she waited. She waited for the well-advertised move by the Scottish National Party. They told the world what they would do, and they did it. They duly did it. They put down a motion censuring the government for what? For not immediately bringing the Act into force. The opposition, of course, want nothing like that. They want the very reverse. They want to get rid of the Act. But it was enough. The SNP's motion was enough for the Chief Whip, opposition Chief Whip. Sent him scurrying off. I'm glad to see he's securely perched this afternoon. Hope he won't fall off. But that's what he'd been waiting for. He went into action. He scurried round to the Liberal Party to find out if they would vote for a motion of censure. And he wasn't disappointed. The Liberals, spinning like a top, assured him, yes, they said, yes. Yes, they said, we'll be ready to take part, we're anxious to take part in the talks with the government on the future of these acts, but equally, we're ready to vote for any motion that will prevent such talks from even beginning. So, fortified by this display of liberal logic, the opposition, the Right Honourable Lady, put down her own vote of no confidence. We can truly say that when the Right Honourable Lady had discovered what the Liberals and the SNP were going to do, she found the courage of their convictions. So this evening, the Conservative Party, who want the Act repealed and oppose even devolution, will march through the lobby with the SNP, who want independence for Scotland, and with the Liberals, who want to keep the Act. What a massive display of unsullied principle. The minority parties have walked into a trap. If they win, there will be a general election. And I am told that the current joke going round the House is that it's the first time in recorded history that turkeys have been known to vote for an early Christmas. Mr. Speaker, last Friday I wrote to those other parties who were basically concerned with devolution to Scotland and Wales, formally confirming the talks that I'd offered in the House. So far, not surprisingly, and I do not complain, I have not had any reply except what the Right Honourable Lady said on television. But when this vote of no confidence is defeated tonight, the government's offer still stands. We will be glad and will seek to open discussions with the other parties about the future of the Scotland Act within the limited time period that I proposed last week. The government firmly believes that this should be the next step before Parliament takes the final step of debating and deciding on the orders to erase the Acts from the statute book. And even, not at the moment. And even amid the general excitement of the day, I asked the House not to forget that the people of Scotland are expecting honourable members here on all sides to treat their constitutional future with seriousness and not just as a byproduct of a grab for office. Today, the Right Honourable Lady has widened the discussion into a general indictment of the government's record and actions.
Order! Prime Minister's not giving away it quite.
In reply, I think as this is a vote of confidence, I'm entitled to deploy our case in the way that I choose best. I reply to the Right Honourable Lady by advancing three propositions. First, this government, which has been in a minority in this House for most of its life, has achieved an outstanding record of social progress and of economic performance. Secondly, and here I would not differ from the Right Honourable Lady, that during the years that lie ahead there will be a great deal for the government and the country to do in such areas as improving our industrial efficiency, the return to full employment, controlling prices, better industrial relations, overcoming poverty. There will be no sense of complacency by this government about what still needs to be done. But neither should we overlook the achievements of the last 5 years. And my third proposition, Mr. Speaker, is that we shall make most progress in this country by adapting and broadening the policies that have served so far to protect the people of this country in the midst of world recession, and not by sudden switches or reversals of policy. The Right Honourable Lady clearly believed this afternoon she was putting forward some new proposals. On the contrary, what we've heard is a repetition of the same old policies that the Conservative Party tried and failed between 1970 and 74, and which finally led to the ignominy of the 3-day candle-lit week in which the last Conservative government expired. So perhaps I'm glad to see the honourable gentleman is now awake. Be a good boy, Freddie. So perhaps my honourable friends will allow me to add a fourth proposition to the other three. If we're to succeed, then the country needs a Labour majority at the next election with a working majority. And we shall seek that in the early future. During the coming year, Mr. Speaker, developments in the world at large will critically affect our prospects in this country for jobs and for prices and for trade. Last summer in Bonn, I met with the leaders of 6 of the major industrial countries, and together with my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, we pressed very hard that all the countries present should take domestic action that would sustain world levels of trade and improve the unequal distribution of our balance of payments. The measures we then decided upon, to which all of us set our hand, have had a good measure of success. And as a result, the world has benefited from a faster rate of growth, including this country. But with some notable exceptions, prices are still rising too fast throughout the world, and the level of world unemployment is not yet falling. Yesterday's decision by the oil-producing countries to raise prices will not help either inflation or unemployment, and will increase the problems caused by the interruption in Iranian oil supplies. They will have a further adverse effect on world trade and on the world balance of payments, especially of large importing countries like the United States. The price increases may well force certain countries to adopt more restrictive trade and growth policies. They will certainly make it more necessary than ever for all countries to adopt concerted and cooperative policies if we are to maintain levels of world trade and employment. And I say to the Right Honourable Lady that although she says when these meetings take place that they are not worthwhile, I promise her that if she ever had the responsibility, she would very quickly learn how valuable they are. Mr. Speaker, I wish to emphasise the priority that must be given to saving oil on a world scale. Britain is more fortunate than most. This year, thanks to the North Sea enterprises, we shall produce 3/4 of our requirements. In the course of the next year, Britain will reach self-sufficiency. That is an inestimable boon. Nevertheless, there is an obligation on Britain, as on everyone else, to be sparing, to be economical in the use of oil, and to meet the international obligations we've entered into in company with other countries. There is general agreement among the industrial countries that we should reduce oil consumption in each of our countries by 5%. I believe that to be the minimum reduction. We in Britain are working to that end, and we're fortunate to have a well-based coal industry to replace part of our oil consumption. But although in this country our supplies are reasonably assured and we may escape comparatively unscathed, nevertheless, if an oil scarcity should develop or high prices should restrict the level of output in other countries, it will clearly become more difficult for us to export. I want to say this now, for jobs in export industries will be at greater risk, with a consequential effect working through the rest of our economy like that of other countries. Mr. Speaker, I claim that the government's economic policies are well designed to meet this test. We have given high priority to new investment in industrial plant and machinery through tax reliefs and direct financial aid, and our industries have responded by investing more. We've made the restraint of inflation an overriding priority to keep our costs down. We've doubled our program to train skilled men and women for new jobs. We've established the National Enterprise Board. Which is giving financial backing to new industries and enterprises like the Rolls-Royce Aero engine that will power the new American Boeing aircraft, or the microprocessor venture in which we intend to mark out a place among world leaders. Since 1974, we've set up the successful Scottish and Welsh development agencies to encourage new enterprises. Employers and trade unions are jointly working together to study the future prospects for their industries, for export markets, how to protect and prevent import penetration, and doing this under the aegis of the sector working parties. Working together, they are between themselves and with the aid of the government. I note what the Right Honourable Lady says about protecting yesterday's jobs, and I agree that there is a case here where we must strike a balance between protecting jobs that are now fading and creating new jobs. But I can claim, and if the opposition, I think if the opposition were really looking at this objectively, they would agree that that it does make sense to protect some of our more vulnerable industries from the onslaught that's being made on them by the new industrial countries. And we have eased their transitional difficulties by financial help, or perhaps I should say by public expenditure, so giving them a breathing space while they adapt to new methods or to new products. And during 1978, against this background, unemployment was reduced by more than 100,000. Mr. Speaker, we have found both employers and workers ready to take advantage of this partnership with the government, and by working together, we are slowly but surely, too slowly for my liking, but slowly but surely, making British industry more fit to face the rigours of world competition. Nor have we overlooked that during such a period of transition there are bound to be casualties among companies and firms, and the government has devised social measures to ease the problem for those who are affected. The Job Release Scheme, which allows older people to retire at age 62 with an allowance provided they are replaced by younger people. The subsidy paid to small firms who take on extra full-time workers. The programme that helps people between the ages of 19 and 24 who've been out of work for 6 months. The payments made to companies forced to work short time, which compensates them at a rate of 75% of the gross wages for each day lost. All these and other schemes operated by the Manpower Services Commission have led the rest of Europe. I ask the Right Honourable Lady to note this when she is so scathing about our work. I ask her to note this. The rest of Europe to acknowledge that this country has a comprehensive job creation and job protection programme which has eased the social tensions that would otherwise have been created, and which we have witnessed on our television screens in some other countries. We on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, are convinced that this basic approach makes for greater sense than the free market, free-for-all, the approach that would abolish grants and financial aid put forward by the opposition spokesman, would undermine and destroy these programmes and this policy. If they were to get their hands on our affairs, it would be an act of industrial vandalism. No. Now, Mr. Speaker, I turn to some aspects of industrial relations. And as the Right Honourable Lady correctly said, the events of the winter demonstrate the difficulties into which a society like ours can be drawn. But they demonstrate one other thing. They demonstrate one other thing, and that is the difficulties that arise when there is not an agreed understanding between the government and the trade unions. If there had been agreement last autumn, we might well have avoided some of the events of the winter. I don't seek to ascribe responsibility for the failure to agree, but I do point to the consequences, especially to those who believe that confrontation is the best way forward. Are the events of this winter to become a regular pattern under a Conservative government? The government has reached a new agreement with the TUC. The government has reached a new agreement with the TUC. It isn't perfect. It may be breached on occasion, but our future prospects depend on how successfully this agreement is built on. It is important for its reaffirmation, and let the opposition deny it if they dare, that government and TUC must work in partnership. Is that agreed or not? Is that agreed or not? And let me add, Mr. Speaker, let me add that the government takes most view, and I come immediately to the point raised by the honourable member for Exeter. The government takes the view that we shall make most progress by building the widest possible economic consensus between the unions and the employers and the government. And I hope that answers his question. The agreement between us covers three areas. First, there is the guidance that the TUC has issued to its affiliated unions on the handling of industrial relations, on the need to observe agreements, that strike action should be taken in the last resort. A strong recommendation for strike balance. It recognises the concern about the certain aspects of the closed shop and gives advice on the flexible operation of such agreements. Those are the issues upon which the opposition have focused. Do they prefer to jeer at the prospects of its breaking down rather than hoping that it will succeed? Second, the TUC... No. Secondly, there is agreement on the need to take part each year by the TUC in a national assessment in which the CBI also would be associated of the prospects of the economy for the year ahead. Something put forward by the Right Honourable Lady. A little late, but she did put it forward. Don't jeer that. Or I must say, if anybody jeers that, they'll be in for a wigging pretty quickly. And to discuss what increase in production can be achieved, how much increase in labour costs the country can afford, how much inflation can be kept down. There's a bold target, I think a very ambitious target, but we've set our hands to it, of working to get inflation below 5% in the next 3 years. That's the objective. And thirdly, there is recognition of the problem of how to adjust remuneration differentially between the various groups of workers, and particularly in the public services, without leading to one group leapfrogging over another. This is a most difficult area. We have not found the answer to it yet, no government at any time. I'm grateful to Professor Clegg and his colleagues. I hope my honourable friends are noting the jeers. I am grateful to Professor Clegg and his colleagues who've undertaken the task in the new Standing Committee on Pay Comparability. The agreement with the TUC recognises and sets out that some of these pay problems, because they are becoming more intractable, they are ready to take part in work to try to achieve what? A national consensus on the overall distribution of income, important areas for discussion and agreement. They really cannot be solved by the Right Honourable Lady's simplistic approach, which she described some months ago as the withdrawal of government from interference in wage bargaining. How Right Honourable Lady hopes soon to have responsibility. In that case, the question I am about to ask becomes much more pertinent. How, if she proposes to, withdraw from interference in wage bargaining, how will she deal with the public services pay in these circumstances? What principles would she apply? I very much regret that in her reactions, her first reactions, I hope later ones will be different. She poured scorn on the effectiveness of this agreement. Unlike, I may say, the Right Honourable Member for Lowestoft. But then as we know, no, I won't embarrass him. Mr. Speaker, if the country can secure, if any government can secure success in these areas, it'll take us a long way forward in solving a problem which has long been the cause of inflationary discontent, namely how to adjust pay levels in different occupations and industries without at the same time generating other claims which at the end of the day leave the structural problem unsolved but in the process fuel inflation. And this agreement with the TUC has set some very ambitious aims. They're a formidable challenge not only to the government but to the trade union movement itself. And the seriousness with which the solution to these problems are pursued, and the government is now following them up with the TUC, will be watched closely by the country to see whether the agreement has the substance that I believe it will have. I'm certain that this is the better way forward, far better than the plan of the opposition, which seems to be to dust off some of its more ancient pieces of artillery left over from 1970 and make a planned industrial offensive. Of course it is right to highlight in individual or collective acts of folly and excessive abuses of power. Of course it is right. Evils, I may say, that the great majority of trade unionists deplore just as much as the rest of the community. But for the Conservative Party to highlight and to exploit individual cases as a means of driving the trade union movement as a whole into a corner, tarring all the 11 million members of unions with the same brush, is a dangerous miscalculation. Mr. Speaker, the 1980s will not be the occasion for an action replay of the Tories' misjudgments of the 1970s. The agreement with the TUC may not be perfect, but it's an important step towards industrial peace and to steadier prices. It's an agreement that deserves support, not sabotage. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady seemed to be under the impression today that she's been proposing some entirely new policies, making a new beginning. Four propositions she put forward. I'm bound to say that what she was really doing was to offer us the stale and outdated 1970 Conservative Party manifesto. Now, I know the opposition wants to forget 1970 to 74. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Bexley, is removed from the Conservative Party's collective thinking like Trotsky's been blotted out in the photographs of the Stalinist era. Indeed.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, I am provoking them a little, I recognise that. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, if we're to judge from recent broadcasts, Conservative history ceased when Harold Macmillan stepped down as Prime Minister in '63. But I promise her that each of the main planks which I wrote down here that she put forward today were nailed down in that 1970 manifesto. Cut taxes, he said, curb the power of the trade unions, centralised power must be decentralised, full-hearted support for the European community. It was all there. And what was the result when they were elected? when the Conservative Party got back to power, and I'm not going to talk about the end of it, property speculators were given a free hand.
Order! The Right Honourable Lady was heard in silence. Now, perhaps we can continue. Prime Minister.
Property speculators were given a free hand. Credit control was abolished. The money supply was increased to finance some pretty phony finance companies. They opened up one of the most... I wouldn't advise anybody to say that outside. They opened up one of the most disreputable periods in the history of the City of London. I know that many of the reputable companies in the city look back on it with distaste. But now, with their hopes of a Conservative victory rising, some of the speculators are emerging from their holes, rubbing their hands. I warn them not to count their chickens before their checks bounce. The Conservatives failed when they were in office to safeguard our greatest national asset, North Sea oil. They handed out the assets to the oil companies with unparalleled generosity. They would have let the revenues from the oil slip through their fingers. They left gaping loopholes in the rules governing corporation tax paid by the oil companies. They didn't even negotiate an arrangement under which the United Kingdom, the home country, could ensure for itself a substantial proportion of the oil that's being pumped. They didn't even do that. We had to put all this right when we came back to power. And through the participation agreements, this country can now be sure of safeguarding for our own use a substantial proportion of the oil that is pumped. On the other side of the coin, as I have already indicated, their doctrinaire approach to industrial relations in that period of government left an Act of Parliament which, as the CBI spokesman told us, was surrounded by hatred and where every relationship was sullied by its provisions. That was what they did. Right Honourable Lady, the Right Honourable Lady calls for less government this afternoon. Does she really think we've forgotten the handiwork of the Right Honourable Member for Worcester and for Leeds East? Let her reflect. Let her reflect for a moment when she calls for less bureaucracy and no doubt hopes to get an awakening echo. Let her reflect that the biggest increase in bureaucracy over any period of government came in local government between the years 1970... $300,000 more people in local government between 1970 and 74. And she calls for less bureaucracy. And in the health service. Oh, let's forget the health service. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Leeds North East, achieved a double. An unenviable double. He set up a new form of organisation that was unsuited to the service, and at the same time he managed to dramatically increase the numbers of people working in the administration. It really doesn't lie. It really doesn't lie, nor does it carry conviction in the mouth of the Right Honourable Lady to call for a reduction in bureaucracy, or to speak of Whitehall, as she said, Whitehall strangling local democracy. Does she think we have no memories? She complains about inflation. Well, with justification. I complain too, but what's more, we do something about it. At 9.6%, it is higher than it should be. But we brought it down from 25%. And what happened between 1970 and 74? It more than doubled. More than doubled. That's it. And today the figure that is complained of is lower than when the opposition left office. But if we speak of monetary policy, let me give the figures for monetary policy, because we are being invited to go back to the old remedies. In 1970 to 74, the average annual increase in money supply was 21 to 22% a year. Under this government, the average is about 9% a year. When they were in power, they got rid of the Industrial Reorganisation Corporation. This time, they want to hamstring the National Enterprise Board. They intend to cut public expenditure. They keep saying so. What do they propose to do? Do they propose to stop the National Enterprise Board funding the new Rolls-Royce aero engine? Answer. There are more questions yet. Let's have a compendium. Is it the European Airbus they intend to cut? Will they stop the production of the new HS-146 aircraft? Is it the youth employment schemes that are to go? Is it the Welsh Development Agency or the Scottish Development Agency, which is at this moment backing 9,000 jobs with £20 million of investment? Is it the new social benefits that we've introduced that are to go? Is it the Mobility Allowance for the disabled? The Invalid Care Allowance? The help to disabled housewives? I make no mention of school boards. Since we came into office, the average number of patients on each general practitioner's list the average number of patients on each doctor's list has declined. Are they to be allowed to swell again when public expenditure is cut? The number of people served by home helps have increased. The Meals on Wheels service is enlarged. Is it these that are to be cut back? Is it the rebuilding of our cities that is to be cut back? Would they tamper with the child benefit scheme, whose allowance is to be increased from £3 to £4 on the 1st of April? What about the pensioners? During the Conservative term of office, pensioners' living standards fell behind those of the population who are working. They fell behind. By contrast, this government has steadily improved the real position of the pensioner year by year by increasing the pension by whichever has been the higher of the forecast earnings or the forecast of prices. That is now a statutory responsibility. It has improved the standard of life of the pensioner after he or she retires by comparison with the wage earner. Let me give the figure. When the party opposite left office, the pensioner's proportion of the net earnings of a married manual worker was 40%. Today, the pensioner's proportion of the same net earnings of the married male worker is 50%, an increase in real standards. And we shall, of course, fulfil our statutory obligations again this year. This is the season of estimates and revenue. Yesterday we debated expenditure on the armed forces for the coming year. Today I would like to inform the House of the Chancellor's estimate for old age pensions for the coming year. First, he has provided for a correction to the underestimate in the forecast made this time a year ago. a question that has been raised on a number of occasions on both sides of the House. Earnings, but mainly this side, I grant. Earnings, but let's associate them with it. Let's associate them with it. Don't let them escape their share of responsibility. Earnings last year rose faster than the forecast on which he based his uprating at that time. He's taken account of this in the new increase that will operate for the next pension year from November. For a married couple, therefore, he has provided for an increase in the pension next November of about £4 a week to around £35, and for a single person of about £2.50 a week to about £22. That is provided in the estimates. Mr. Speaker, this will be one more step, one more important step to reduce the gaps that still exist in our society, to remedy the injustices, to erase the class divisions and racial bigotry, to attack poverty and the lack of opportunity that still face many of our citizens. The difference between the opposition and ourselves is that we know these problems will not be solved by a return to those policies of 1970 or by soup kitchen social services. They will only be overcome if we can harness the energy and the ideals of our people to build a fairer and a more just society. Let need and not greed be our motto. Our purpose as a government and as a party is to present a bold socialist challenge to all these problems as we face these tasks. And I ask for the confidence of the House and of the country so that we can continue with our work.
I think honourable members have conveyed their message. Mr. David Steele. Order. Order. I'm going to call the leader of the Liberal Party, Mr. David Steele.
Mr. Speaker, the news that we've just heard may mean that not so many members will rush for the traditional cup of tea at this particular point in confidence debates, since there is none, I understand, available. But, Mr. Speaker, I take the view that this debate really is not about the relative merits of the political parties. That is a debate which will take place during a general election. What we have to decide tonight is whether we believe that the time has come for a general election. And it is certainly our intention to cast our votes tonight, as we've done consistently since November, on confidence issues in pursuit of an early general election. I've never made any secret of the fact, either privately or publicly, that it was our view that an election should have been held last autumn, when Parliament had completed 4 years of its life and when it was shown that there was no long-term common ground to enable us to continue the Lib-Lab agreement. And therefore, I believe from October on, the government was inevitably going to be lacking in political stability, and I argued then that that was our opportunity to take our different views to the electorate. And I think that everything that has happened since October does add weight to the case for fixed parliaments, as in most of the other developed democracies. It is, I think, the case that general election date speculation is one of the few growth occupations in Britain today, absorbing politicians, journalists, bookmakers, but far more seriously, disrupting industry and commerce. I believe that that process is damaging, and I think that the case has been increasingly made out for moving to a fixed term of Parliament rather than leaving the decision in the hands of one individual. Now, Mr. Speaker, it will be obvious to everybody in this House that there are in fact only two lobbies, and although the Prime Minister had his fun at our expense, I have to make it absolutely clear, in view of some of the letters that I've been receiving in the last couple of days, that there is no question in our voting for a general election tonight to appear to be voting in any way for the Conservative Party simply because they are in the same lobby. I have had a large number of letters in the last few days from members of the Labour Party, from members of my own party, and even surprisingly from members of the Conservative Party, who say, oh, you shouldn't vote for an election now because there might be a large Conservative majority and how terrible that would be for the country. Well, I'm a Democrat. I don't believe in opinion polls. I believe in the electorate's decision. And if the electorate happened to vote for a large Conservative majority, then the electorate would have to live with the consequences of that. I certainly would do my best during an election campaign to dissuade them from that particular course. But fear of any possible political outcome of an election is not grounds for allowing the present parliamentary state of affairs to continue. But the government has been seen to be staggering on. Vast attention is paid outside to speeches made at the weekend, such as that by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for South Down, wanting pipelines to Ulster. I believe that issues like the compensation for the slate quarrymen ought to be discussed on their merits and not on questions of whether or not, not on questions of whether or not three members might or might not be in any particular lobby. Yes.
I apologise for interrupting the Right Honourable Gentleman. I thought he might be interested to know, in view of the context in which he was placing this matter, that the recommendation of a connection by way of a gas pipeline between Great Britain and Northern Ireland has been made consistently by members of my party for at least the last 3 years.
I dare say it has, but the Right Honourable Gentleman of all people was not born yesterday, and he read the reports of his own speech as I did, and he knows in what context they were placed. Now, I also believe that this particular decision that we have to take tonight is not about devolution. Again, I think the Prime Minister is entitled to have his fun, but in fact we have always taken the view that the future of devolution and the future of the government are two entirely separate questions. It is our view that whatever happens, whether we have an election now, whether we have a change of government, or whether this government is returned, the only way we can make progress on devolution is through some form of all-party consultation following the referendum. We know that it is essential to find a parliamentary solution to the question of devolution because we have the lesson of Ireland before us, where this Parliament failed to find an acceptable solution. And over the years, eventually, we saw the bitterness, the bloodshed, and the eventual separation of a great part of Ireland. Surely we want to try and avoid that, and surely, therefore, the right way forward is for us to engage in future discussion. But nobody, not even the Prime Minister, seriously believes that there is the remotest prospect of either passing the order through both Houses of Parliament to bring the present Act into effect or passing an amending Act to make it more acceptable to the people of Scotland in the lifetime of this Parliament. It cannot be done. And therefore, although it is quite proper if the government wins tonight that we should continue with the process of all-party discussions, this is going to have to be carried forward through an election and into the next Parliament. And I only wish that the Right Honourable Lady were more forthcoming now with her views on devolution post-referendum than we have heard. Because the Conservative Party is going to have to find a policy on this issue during the election, and certainly if they ever happen to become the government. So we separate the question of the future of devolution from the question of the future of the government. Now, the two other leaders have already dwelt on their record, and it is perhaps an unusual position for the leader of the Liberal Party in modern times to be talking about the record of the Liberal Party, but I certainly intend to do so, because I believe that the record actually shows that the period of greatest success in modern government was in fact the period of the Lib-Lab agreement. And I say that, yes, I'm going to show why it was. First of all, I say this for three reasons. First of all, during that period, we had a Labour government in office, but left-wing state socialism had to be abandoned for that period. Therefore, there was a degree of political stability and there was a degree of government of this country from the centre, and that in itself was beneficial. Secondly, if you look at the figures of inflation, the opposition made great play the other week with some justification of the fact that if you apply the Healy formula to inflation, that is the figure for the last 3 months expressed as an annual rate, it comes out in the last 3 months at 13.3%. But they have to remember their own record as well. In the last 3 months they were in office, the equivalent figure was 18%. And it rose during the period of Tory government from a mere 5% in 1970 up to that 18% by the time they left office. In the 3 months taking the same formula before the Lib Lab Pact, it had gone up to 21%. And yet it was during that period of government that the inflation level came down to 7.4%, and sadly it's gone way up again. Now these are facts which cannot be disputed. Yes, I do.
I'm greatly obliged. If the right honourable gentleman is in favour of fixed-term parliaments and thinks the Lib Lab Pact was a very good thing, why did he not continue it for the full duration of this parliament?
We've debated this issue before, but I'll recap on it. The simple reason is that there was no long-term basis of agreement between the two parties, and that is why I said that we should take our different views to the electorate. And I will be specific. The one particular issue, and we've since, I think, been justified by events in which we felt quite strongly, was that there was no sign that the government was going to be able to maintain as effective a pay policy as it had during the previous period. And honourable members opposite know that to be true. But I go on and give them more facts. Look at the level of mortgage rates at the present, 11.75%. I remember during the last general election, the right honourable lady, now the leader of the opposition, was promising that if a Conservative government was returned, mortgages would be pegged at 9.5%. Yet when they left office, they were at 11%. Under Labour government, they went up to 12.25%. In the Lib Lab period, they were down to 8.5%. So that if you use that as a yardstick, we were more successful. Why not? Well, I'm sorry, honourable members may not like the facts, but I'm quoting the facts, and I believe that this was an important and improved way of running the country. My third reason was not an economic one. The third reason is that we saw in that period the start of some injection of Liberal influence for the first time into the government of the country. And I mentioned the specific issue of the legislation of last April on profit sharing. It has taken a year, of course, for this to come into effect, but already 48 companies have adopted the profit sharing proposals of last year's Finance Act. And the city editor of The Observer, writing the other week, said this: such schemes will help to bring about a closer harmony between employees and management. That will be to the whole community's advantage. In fact, even at this early stage, companies with such schemes report a greater profit consciousness among employees. Now, I believe that was a very modest start on the direction which this House ought to be travelling. It is absolutely essential that we link future pay policy in the private sector to actual profits and productivity, because that is the only way in which we will succeed in creating a healthy and successful private sector with which to sustain the public sector. And I believe that in the public sector it is going to be necessary to accept what the Prime Minister said, a consensus, yes, between government, unions and employers. But that consensus has got to be a long-lasting one. And great damage has been done to pay policy by the chopping and changing both between government and within government. Look at the bodies we've had. The Prices and Incomes Board, set up, abolished. The Relativities Board, set up, abolished. And now the Comparability Committee. How much better it would have been and how much fairer to groups who have suffered by the chopping and changes of pay policy if we'd had one body in the public sector operating continuously through changes of government. And I believe the seesaw in pay policy has been most damaging to the country and most unfair to certain groups who found themselves caught in the changes of policy. This is the direction in which we want to move, but I don't believe it's a direction in which we can move as a country, so long as the two sides in our industrial conflict are financed, and the two sides in our political system are financed by the two sides of that industrial conflict. The Right Honourable Lady the other day in a speech urged the electorate to break with the recent past, but it is an illusion to believe that the problems of this country have all begun in recent years since the Conservative Party was last in office. The fact is that, relatively speaking, compared with our European neighbours, we have been steadily sliding down the scale of success and prosperity as a nation ever since the early 1950s. And to pretend otherwise is to try and delude the electorate. I believe that that is, to some extent, and to quite a considerable extent, due to the political system which we operate in marked contradistinction to that of most of our European neighbours. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, that this Parliament finds itself stuck on devolution, finds itself stuck on tax reform, finds itself stuck on pay policy, and on industrial relations policy is not only stuck, but is subcontracting its responsibilities to groups outside Parliament. This, therefore, is the case for a fresh Parliament. I believe that the electors of Edge Hill will point to a better way tomorrow. I think there is a better way of running Britain, and the sooner the rest of the country is given the same opportunity, the better.
Mr. Donald Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, the Scottish National Party moved a motion of no confidence in the government because of the refusal of the government to honour their manifesto commitment to the Scottish people. However, the Scottish National Party has other areas of dispute with the government, why we lack confidence in the government, and I will come to these presently. The reality of the political situation in Scotland is that a majority voted yes to a Scottish Assembly, and that Scottish Assembly is not being delivered. Now, we have heard some complaints during and since the campaign that only 30-odd% of the people had voted in favour of an Assembly. There were complaints from the no campaigners that those in favour of a yes were claiming that an abstention meant no. Whether that was true or not, it certainly appears to be the case subsequently when we hear the figures being totalled up and the claim being made that only a third of the people of Scotland voted for the Assembly. The reality is that of those who turned out, there was a clear majority voting yes. That is the reality of the situation, and that is the system on which such decisions have been made, both in this House and at elections generally. And we can make a fair assumption, Mr. Speaker, that come the next general election, whether it is the Prime Minister that is returned or the Right Honourable Lady, the Leader of the Conservative Opposition, whoever wins, even by one seat, no matter how small the percentage, there won't be any great delay in working with computers to see if they have a 40% backing up. They will nip smartly into number 10 and claim that they have a mandate to carry out whichever of their doctrinal policies they have been elected on. I said that, sir. If the events of the last 5 years have proved anything, they have proved that the London-based parties cannot be trusted to look after Scotland's interests. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, devolution has been a question in Scotland for at least 10 years, and although every political party on the Scottish scene went into the last election committed to an Assembly, all that arrived after the election was more talks and more white papers. And then we had the first Scotland and Wales bill, and that was killed off. And then we had a new bill, and the 40% clause was inserted. And now that the campaign in favour was successful, Westminster wants to kill the Scotland Act. Now, I take the Prime Minister's point about the Right Honourable Lady's lack of any commitment to devolution. I don't expect any from her. But she'll have to live in a real world, assuming that she's returned after the next election. And the Scottish people will educate her if she happens to be at number 10 Downing Street at that time. Because the problem is not going to go away. It will be large on her desk and will have to be dealt with. And incidentally, I may say here that the noble Lord Hume will have to come forward. He has a moral obligation in view of the line he took in the referendum campaign. He has a moral obligation to see that something is put up from the Conservatives better than the government bill. It was a bad act, they all said. Yes, it was far from perfect. We agreed that it was far from perfect. But it was made a bad act by many of the people who were making that claim, because they tore it to pieces in its passage through the House here, and it was made worse than it had originally come up with. The Labour government has made no real attempt to deal with Scotland's persistently lower living standards and poorer social conditions. I'll give you some facts. As my honourable friend, the member for Perth East Perthshire, pointed out in the public expenditure debate, Scotland has a better export performance than the United Kingdom as a whole. And as the chairman of the Scottish Council of Development and Industry stated recently, and I quote him, between 1974 and 1977, exports from Scotland rose by 24%, in real terms compared with 14% for the UK as a whole. And the latest report by Reward Regional Service Limited, and that's an independent consumer research organisation, it shows that the cost of living in Scotland is 4.5% above the UK average, and that the cost of consumer goods are higher in Scotland. And Scottish families are double losers in the price war. Although the costs of very basic items like food, household goods and transport are all higher in Scotland than the UK average, the government's own family expenditure survey shows that Scottish family incomes are considerably lower than in other parts of the UK.
Family incomes, yes.
And retail prices in Scotland have risen by more than 10p in the pound in the past year. Again, the biggest increase in the United Kingdom. Despite all this, it has taken great pressure from my party and a good deal of work by my honourable friend, the member for Eastern Barton, to get the government to agree grudgingly to an investigation into prices in Scotland. Now, the government has a dreadful record on inflation. When the Prime Minister made his point about reducing the figure, the question was well put, who had raised it to the high level in the first place. And despite the present temporary drop, the plain fact is that the value of the pound has more than halved in the 5 years of this government. And what is the government doing in the face of this situation? Scotland is being starved of government expenditure, and indeed the government's white paper approved by the House on the 19th of March envisages a lower level of public expenditure in Scotland than in the UK as a whole. The 5-year growth rate for the UK has been set at about 10%, while the corresponding growth rate projected for Scotland between 1979 and 80 and 1982-83 is only 6.4%. In addition, Scotland receives far less than a fair share in such areas as the nationalised industries, defence and foreign affairs. Scarcely any money in the forward planning for roads between now and 1983. A glaring omission at a time when Scotland needs additional infrastructure to back up oil and other industries. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I end by returning to the question of Scottish Government. I say to the Government and to the Conservative opposition, the Scottish desire for self-government is alive and is thriving, and resentment is growing at the apparent wish of a majority here to frustrate the desire to make divisions in Scotland for Scotland. No excuses of a bad bill. No all-party talks as a further exercise in futility. No propaganda trying to turn a majority vote into a minority. These don't take a trick any longer. It's a pity that too many Labour MPs did not back their own party policy and their own legislation in this House, and their government may have to pay the price.
Mr. Gwynfor Evans.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, a week ago the position of my two colleagues in Plaid Cymru and myself was that we would vote in the earliest motion of confidence against the government and for the opposition.
And then he was bribed.
We had very good reasons for that, and had in fact drafted our own motion of censure, which we intended setting down following that of the SNP. And we wanted then, we still want to place on record our disgust with the way in which the government has tumbled clumsily and sometimes disastrously with Wales during the last period of time. Not a single aspect of Welsh life is stronger because of the activity of this Labour government. If one looks at employment, for instance, when the government came into power in March 74, there were 38,000 people unemployed in Wales. Today it's 88,452, an increase of 230%. And this is a tremendous waste of human resources, of course, at a time when so much work needs to be done in the country. And there's even now still a declining number of jobs for those who are unemployed in our country. And the government has presided over the withdrawal of an active regional policy. The regional premium came to an end in 1976. The IDC policy has become worthless. And when London found itself needing jobs, then regional policy was effectively abandoned. And the government has consistently refused to draw up an economic plan for Wales. It's also failed to give a lead towards a new industrial order. We had expected that from this government, an industrial order based on cooperation and on harmony and a common purpose in industry, which should be the objective, I think, of all industrial democracy. But we haven't had this, and a part of the consequences is the kind of industrial chaos we've seen this winter. And when one turns to coal, we had the experience during the period of the last Labour government between 1964 and 1970 of seeing one coal mine closed in Wales for every 7 weeks of that period. Well, they're still intending to close coal mines in Wales. And we've had notice now that a number are to be closed whose stocks have not been depleted. And that, although the subsidy per tonne in Wales for coal is £3 only, compared with Germany, where it's £11.93 per tonne, compared with Belgium, where it's £24.60 per tonne. And when one looks at the steel industry, then we note that the promised investment in Port Talbot has been suspended, with the result that uncertainty looms over its future, and that Shotton is now following East Moors and following Ebble Vale as the victims of the government's failure to provide the conditions suitable to these basic industries' survival. In housing, we have one of the worst housing records in the United Kingdom. We have an older stock of houses in Wales than any other part of the United Kingdom, in great need of repair and replacement. And yet, public expenditure on housing in Wales has actually been reduced below the UK average. It was only 3.9% of the UK average last year. And there are now 107,000 houses in Wales which are condemned as unfit for human habitation, and over 50,000 families on the waiting lists waiting for houses. And this is at a time when there are 15,000 building workers unemployed in the country with a job like this to do. And effectively, of course, we haven't had any leasehold reforms of any value either enacted. In agriculture, which my own constituency is particularly interested, the government has failed abysmally to fulfill the plan set out in its pamphlet, Food from Our Own Resources, and half the growth sectors identified in that white paper has seen an actual decline in production. And there's been no serious attempt at all to establish effective policies for marginal land, of which we have such a great quantity in Wales. Marginal land development is essential to increased food production in our country. Yeah. Then, when we look at the health and social services, we find that morale in the health services has declined sharply because of mismanagement and bureaucratic structures unresponsible to our own human needs. And adequate resources have not been made possible for, with a result, the level of service in our hospitals and so on has dropped, and the waiting lists have escalated. In my own largest hospital in the constituency, where we have 560 beds, we haven't even a unit for intensive care. That is a situation that we find in so many places in our country. And then in education, there has been a failure to use the teachers who have been trained in great numbers in our country, with a ridiculous consequence that there are hundreds of teachers on the dole And yet there are so many schools with classes which are far too large to be taught properly. And virtually no lead has been given either in what should be the right of all Welsh people to have their children educated to the Welsh language, both in primary schools and in secondary schools. That has to be established as a right, but this government has taken no step at all to do that. And we have in school buildings a higher proportion of pre-1903 buildings than any other country in Britain, and very little is done to expend money on improving the standard of the school buildings. On taxation, the government have allowed inflation to increase faster than the rise of the threshold level for payment of income tax, with the result that persons on very low incomes, even pensioners now, find themselves paying taxes. In the field of broadcasting, despite the commitment of the government for years past now to establish in Wales the 4th channel as a national Welsh channel, no effective steps have yet been taken to that end. And this means that the language is being more rapidly eroded than it should be eroded, a language which is the greatest treasure that we have in Wales, one of the greatest treasures in the whole of these islands. And on the question of the language, one can say that the government has made no attempt at all to implement the recommendations, the very fine recommendations of its own language council. It set it up itself, but it has now disbanded it, and not one of its recommendations have been fulfilled and adopted.
Don't vote for them. Just wait.
To give the Welsh language the support it needs, there must be a body set up to supervise the recommendations when they're implemented, and to start a new wave of sympathy and support for the language in Wales. This is a matter of the most basic importance for the future of our society, of our community. And then when one looks at communications, we see that Wales lags badly behind both Scotland and England in the quality of its principal roads, which are so necessary to industrial development. We're to have balanced industrial development. And not 1 mile of railway in Wales has yet been electrified. Over 2,000 miles in England electrified, not a single mile in Wales. And the government has failed to grasp the opportunity offered by Air Wales to establish an air service network in Wales. And the potential also of the Welsh ports, which is so great, the potential of the Welsh ports has also been ignored. And in regard to constitutional issues, well, the government has failed to present proposals for greater democratic control of the government in Wales, which were acceptable to the people of Wales, nor have they succeeded in correcting the failures of the Tories in their Local Government Act of 1972. And looking at rates, well, under this government, the rate support grant paid to the counties in Wales, which are non-metropolitan, has been eroded, and with the resources transferred to the inner cities in England. And this has resulted in a mean rate increase of 24% for the coming year in Wales. Now, water resources, these matters appear to be unimportant, of course, to gentlemen who represent English constituencies. Despite the pretense of an equalisation grant, an equalisation of water charges with Wales, between Wales and England, water rates in Wales still remain 58% higher than English rates. And the inequitable system of charging for water on the basis of rateable value, that remains, of course. And the government has consistently disallowed to Wales the right that she should enjoy of selling the water that flows from Wales to English corporations and English industry. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the fact was that when we were faced with this situation and these needs in Wales which had been neglected, we intended voting against the government. But then, a week today, we were offered the possibility of an act which would create a new situation amongst the quarrymen in Wales and amongst others suffering from dust diseases. I know something of this problem, and I know how desperately needed a humanitarian measure is in these areas. I myself have in my constituency many who suffer from silicosis and pneumoconiosis and emphysema and so on, and I've seen them, as so many people do see them daily, struggling painfully, step by step, having to stop every 2 or 3 steps on their way up a small incline because of the trouble they get in drawing their breath at all. And sometimes they're in their 30s or even in their 40s, very young people suffering in this way. I've been with others who've been in their last period bedridden, gasping for breath, trying to speak a few hoarse words to one with an oxygen system alongside, keeping them alive a little longer. Well, though the government and the NCB and the NUM have produced an inadequately funded system to help pneumoconiotic miners, coal miners and their dependents, there are victims of these diseases in other industries which haven't received anything like adequate compensation, if any compensation at all. In my own constituency, they may have worked in stone or other quarries, may have worked in brickworks or in iron foundries, and they're to be found there suffering from these respiratory diseases. Some have worked in asbestos works, and of course in the cotton mills of Lancashire, they know of the difficulties there with cyanosis and so on. But certainly the biggest group in Wales are those for whom my true colleagues and others have worked so hard. And although the number of quarrymen has declined now from 20,000 to 300, there are still some 1,000 quarrymen who suffer from silicosis, and another 1,000 widows of those who died of the disease. And throughout the years, they've been shockingly neglected. Some papers have alleged that their number is negligible in British terms, and that we've been bought too cheaply. Those words have been used. Well, those who speak in this way just don't appreciate the value of each one human life.
That's right.
France was brought to the verge of a civil war because of the fate of one man, Dreyfus. And whatever electoral cost we may have to pay, and I've no doubt we'll have to pay some electoral cost for the line that we're going to take tonight, but whatever that is, we felt it was right for us to get at least the best possible scheme we could for these people. And the government has provided such a scheme. It's now published. We have it in a bill which is available in the vote office. One wants to collect it there, and its terms are those which do satisfy us. And the government.
Honourable gentleman, I'm very grateful to him, said a little time ago, I think he said last week I was approached by the government, or we were approached. Could the Honourable, those were his words, I believe, would he like to elaborate that a little bit more, because it doesn't quite tie up with what the Prime Minister said.
What happened was that a statement was made by the government that this would be done. There was no approach to us by the government directly at all on this matter. In any case, whatever the electoral cost we may have to pay for this, we think it's right to get the best possible scheme, and the government have produced that scheme. And for these reasons, in order to get the earliest possible compensation for these sufferers and their widows and dependents, and every week matters here, and the government have guaranteed that they will see that the bill is through all its stages, if they remain in power, before the middle of May, and that compensation will be paid in October. And because of this, for these reasons alone, we three have decided tonight to go into the lobby with the government.
Jock Bruce-Gardyne.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's quite like old times. We're called to follow the Honourable Member for Walton. I must say it's a lovely speech, and it grows no worse with repetition. But I am deeply grateful to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to address this Parliament. I don't think you would appreciate it if I craved the indulgence of the House, because you might take the view that I had stretched it rather far, too often, on too many occasions in the past. And since I believe that my honourable friend, the member for Clitheroe, and I were christened retreads by the honourable member for Bolsover on our arrival. I don't think that virginity goes well with a retread. So I think I should, nevertheless, if I may, preface my remarks briefly this evening by paying tribute, as I think the House would wish me to do, to my predecessor, John Davies. It is not, I think, given to many men to serve in this House for 8 years, and during that period to occupy 3 of the highest offices of state. I think it's even rarer for an honourable or right honourable member in this period to gain the sympathy and respect of the House to the extent which John Davies did. I know very well that in Knutsford he is deeply missed and universally respected. And I believe it is also true to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that he is very widely missed for a unique combination of talents, of charm, of sincerity and modesty by honourable members on all sides of the House. And I'm delighted to be able to tell honourable members that he has made a wonderful recovery from his very serious illness and is already back at work and at normal life. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the only excuse I suppose I have for speaking in this debate is that I come fresh from the electorate and so am perhaps in a better position than other honourable members tonight to say something about the confidence of the electorate in Her Majesty's government. The Prime Minister this afternoon referred to the great achievements of the last 5 years. I must confess they don't actually seem to have got through to the electorate. The right honourable gentleman, the leader of the Liberal Party, referred to the particular achievements of the period of the Lib Lab Pact. Well, I have to tell the Liberal Party that those achievements seem also to have left no mark in the minds of those who voted Liberal in 1974 but have no intention of voting Liberal any longer. Because I think that the two emotions which came out most clearly on the doorstep during the period of my by-election, at doorstep after doorstep, were the emotions of anger and despair. Anger at the way in which week after week and month after month, every time the housewife took her shopping bag into the supermarket, prices had soared, despite the frequent assertions of the front bench opposite to the contrary. Despair at the way in which, and one was shown pay slips on the doorstep by people who said, look at the tax I paid last week, and what is the point of going out to work for that? Deep anxiety about what was widely identified as the defenselessness of this country in an increasingly dangerous world. Anger and despair about what was seen widely as falling standards in education and in health, but perhaps above all, anger and despair at what was seen as the inability of this government to offer to ordinary working people and ordinary trades unionists any form of adequate protection against tiny minorities who tried to exercise tyranny over their fellow workers. And it was this, I believe, which was the message which came through clearest of all at doorstep after doorstep. And if the honourable gentleman, the member for Walton, thinks that it is only people, as he put it, who come from the same class as my right honourable friend, the member for Bridlington, feel threatened. I can only wonder how much different the people of Walton are from the people in large council housing estates such as Partington in my constituency. They feel threatened. They feel deeply threatened. They feel threatened at the place of work, and they feel that they do not have adequate defences from this government under the law. Now, I must say, though, to the House that there is, I believe, an even more ominous legacy which this government will very shortly leave behind us. A legacy which perhaps inevitably the generality of electors is not fully aware of yet. And it is to that I want to address just a few remarks this evening, if I may, Mr. Deputy Speaker. When I was here before, I was sometimes accused of being a self-confessed monetarist. In those days, it was rather like being a self-confessed meth drinker or wife beater. Well, times have changed, and it appears that we're all monetarists now. Even the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the House, says he isn't. He must be almost unique. I get the impression, fortunately he is, you're quite right. I get the impression that the members of the Tribune group, rather like the gentleman in Molière, are often monetarists without even realising it. And as for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, of course, he's the greatest monetarist of the lot. He preaches all the fatuities of incomes policy, but the reality of his counter-inflation policy is based solidly and totally in control of the monetary aggregates. But this is what worries me. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the Chancellor, once, I believe, accused my Right Honourable friend, the member for Leeds North East, of being a mad monetarist. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I believe that is an epithet which is far more appropriately applied to himself. What frightens me about this government is this. I believe for a long time that control of the monetary aggregates is an essential, indispensable precondition for control of inflation and a healthy economy. But I certainly do not accept that it is a sufficient one. And what frightens me about this government is that they have combined relative stringency of monetary policy with increasing laxity of control over public expenditure. And that is a combination which spells ruination for the productive private sector of the British economy. And it is my case against them tonight that this is what we are already seeing. The Chancellor has, I believe, also referred in the past to the danger of our catching the Dutch disease. This, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the disease which afflicts a country where the possession, the chance possession of a rare natural resource has the effect, or is allowed to have the effect, of pushing up the exchange rate to the point at which that country's manufacturing industry ceases to be competitive. Now, the Chancellor has said on occasion we must beware of catching that disease. If he weren't the sort of doctor who couldn't even tell chicken pox from acne, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he realised we've already got a rampant case of this disease, and not a week is going by without news of further cutbacks in investment, further plant closures, further redundancies. And there is nothing else that we can expect so long as we have a combination of relatively stringent monetary policy, total laxity of control on public expenditure, and hence an excessive, grossly excessive borrowing requirement, pushing up interest rates and facing us with the choice of either allowing our money supply to expand again and creating inflation again, or, as we have been doing, taking the strain on the exchange rate and seeing it rise. And so I believe that the inevitable legacy of this government, and I believe it is, alas, far too late to halt it now, is not only a substantial acceleration in inflation, but a very substantial acceleration in unemployment too. And alas, I believe it is far too late to stop that now. But why I shall be joining with all my heart in the censure motion before the House tonight is because I believe it is a matter of the utmost urgency that we should have a government in power in this country to begin the cure of this extremely sinister predicament in which we find ourselves. And it is to that I want to address just a few remarks in closing, because I wish to address them to my own honourable and right honourable friends who will soon be occupying the front bench opposite. The government's day is played out, and we must now address ourselves to the future. And the future that my right honourable friends will face is a future where public expenditure programmes are still planned to increase by a further 2% in real terms. By no way can this economy begin to sustain such a proposition. It will be, I believe, our overriding duty to cut out that additional 2% and to cut it out in the first year. I don't think that's going to be at all easy. I believe we shall need to declare a total moratorium immediately on all civil service recruitment. I believe myself that we shall need to disconnect the linkage which at present exists between the value of supplementary benefits and the resale price index. And I believe that we shall also have to prevent happening the government scheme, extremely expensive scheme, for the subsidization of part-time working. Now, I recognize that these and other essentials, if we are going to bring public expenditure under control, the party opposite will say that these will create unemployment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, they have created unemployment. That unemployment is inescapable. What matters is to know where will it happen. Will it happen as it is happening now and will happen more and more in the months ahead? In the productive private sector, if it does, our economy will be destroyed beyond repair. Unless we can switch that inevitable additional unemployment, which is this government's legacy, from the productive private sector to the unproductive, tax-consuming sector, then our prospects are bleak indeed. That is the task that we shall face. It is not an agreeable prospect, and it is the full measure of the legacy which this government leaves behind itself. And if ever there was a case for a vote of no confidence in a government which leaves a legacy of that kind behind, it is proved to the hilt tonight, and I hope we win it.
Yeah. Mr. Gerry, Fitt.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I congratulate the honourable gentleman on his maiden speech in this particular Parliament. And it's quite obvious from his lucidity and his confidence that he is not a newcomer to this House. I sympathise with him to some extent. Perhaps it's not really unwarranted sympathy when he has just paid one set of election expenses and he's here trying to create another election, so he'll have to pay another set, but perhaps again that shows the confidence that he has in his constituency. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this speech of mine tonight, without hesitation, I can say that it is the unhappiest speech that I have ever made in this House. When I was elected in 1966, I came to this House and I sat on the Labour benches. I was under no compulsion to do so, but I have been a committed socialist all my life. And therefore, when I came here, I felt proud and indeed honoured to associate myself with everyone on the Labour side of the House. Then the Labour government was defeated and we went into opposition. And I moved over to the opposition side of the House with the Labour Party. In every single division that has taken place throughout that nearly 14 years in Parliament, I have never once voted in a Conservative lobby. I have at all times committed myself to supporting the policies which I honestly believed were for the good of the United Kingdom. And even, sir, in the years when we were in opposition, when the Conservative government were trying quite courageously and succeeded to some extent to grapple with the problem of Northern Ireland, even then I voted on every other issue with the Labour opposition. And I say here, and I've said it before, that the Conservative government of 1970 to 74 did try, and tried courageously, to reach a settlement in Northern Ireland. It was wrecked, everything which we had built up so laboriously. It was wrecked by the election of 1974 in February of that year. And then eventually, sir, we had the unionist strike, the UWC strike, in May of that year. That strike terrified the Labour government. And since then, the Labour government have been running away. The Labour government have not stood up to unionist, loyalist extremists as they should have done. Looking back in history, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think it will be clearly seen that Labour governments, when in office, are not the best governments to grapple with the Irish problem. Labour oppositions are, because it is then that you see the real conscience of the Labour Party. You see the real conscience, and they are not restricted by the powers of office. And so, sir, I find myself in an extremely difficult position, personal and otherwise.
We all do.
I accept the fact, and I listened to the Prime Minister's speech today, and I agree with every single word of the Prime Minister's speech. And I hope when there is an election that it will be a Labour government that is returned again. I listened to speeches from the opposition side of the House, and I must say they don't particularly fill me with enthusiasm to think of an incoming Conservative government. But on the government's Northern Ireland policy since 1974, it has been absolutely and totally disastrous for the communities in Northern Ireland. As I say, the Conservatives tried to bring people together. But in Northern Ireland at the moment, the communities are more divided than they have been since the onset of the present troubles in 1969 and 70. Because, sir, the present Secretary of State, and let me make it quite clear, some journalists and others are saying that there is some type of personality conflict between myself and the present Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. That is totally untrue. The Secretary of State is implementing this Labour government's policies in Northern Ireland. And if I criticise him, then I criticise this present Labour administration. Sir, since the government went into a minority position in late 1966 or early 1967, they began to make arrangements with unionist representatives from Northern Ireland. And, sir, every deal which they did with them, every arrangement which they made with them, so antagonised the minority community in Northern Ireland that at the present moment, when one denounces the present Labour government, they are getting standing ovations from the minority community in Northern Ireland. And I think that that is a very sad heartbreaking commentary for someone like me, with my record, to stand here and say on the floor of this House. So what has this present government got by doing deals with the Northern Ireland Unionists? First of all, they did deals with them on the seats to increase the number of seats. And I used every effort I could to explain to the government, in public and in private, at the Speaker's Conference and on the floor of this House, how dangerous that was going to be from the community relations point of view in Northern Ireland. No one believed me. They didn't believe me. They thought, oh, well, this will be over. Gerry will always be with us. He's committed, like us, and he'll certainly get over this. But I haven't got over it, and neither have the people that I represent got over it, because they see that action, that one action, as consolidating unionist supremacy in Northern Ireland. Again, sir, on the other issues that we debated here in this House, the Secretary of State was seen by the minority in Northern Ireland not to be like the right honourable gentleman on the opposite side, who was the first Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, not like my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, who were seen in Northern Ireland to be impartial, to be trying to do what they could to bring the communities together. The present Secretary of State is seen in Northern Ireland as a unionist Secretary of State. And as I say, this is not personal. I am saying he is implementing government policy. And if that is government policy, then we are on the road to disaster in Northern Ireland. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there was the increase in seats. The psychological effect of that particular act has so divided the communities in Northern Ireland that it could lead to an even more dangerous situation where the minority population will say, we no longer have any faith in politics. We no longer believe that the Labour government, or any government for that matter, are interested in trying to bring about a settlement. And what there is of the SDLP electorate, it's not going to split up and go to some other party at one end of the spectrum or another at the other end. That community will withdraw from politics altogether. And in that situation, there is only one winner, and that is the men who are at present using the bomb and the bullet, the men of violence, who have consistently said, politics doesn't work. There is only one way to achieve your ends, and that is by the use of terrorism and violence. There are some people in Northern Ireland now, who are saying perhaps they are right. And it is still my job, even at this late hour, to say to those people who are so disenchanted, no, it's not too late. Something yet might be done. And so, sir, the Leader of the House, for whom I've got great respect, I tried to put myself in his position when this government went into a minority position after a series of by-election defeats and resignations. When the right honourable gentleman for down south went to him and said, I presume, I will sustain your government if you will bring a bill through to increase the number of seats. Now, the last thing the right honourable gentleman for down south wants is a government of any description with a big enough majority to carry out its own legislation. He likes the position that he's in now. He loves the position where he can try to balance, and when he can go to little villages and towns throughout South Down and tell everybody how important he is. And he does that every weekend. Every weekend. I've never met another member of Parliament who suffered such delusions of grandeur as the honourable gentleman for down south. But he was. Only 3 weeks ago, he said in a little village in South Down, look at the great achievement that we have had. We have now got a promise of 5 more seats. That will be 17 seats to represent Northern Ireland constituencies. And we, unionists of whatever description we may be, we will have 13 or 14 of them, and we will become the 3rd major force in British political life. How terrible to contemplate that. But the 13, and remember, by the way, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is saying, oh, no, the Unionists are not going to win all those seats. The opposition will win them. He knows more about it than me. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is saying, no, the Unionists are not, some of those seats would go to representatives such as myself. I don't believe that is so. I don't believe that is so. And as I say, it's too terrible to contemplate what the future holds. Can you imagine going into an election now, and that's what this debate is all about, can you imagine what it would be like to come back again into another hung parliament where you had to depend on the votes of the Ulster Unionists? And after having done all these deals with them, after having so antagonised the minority community, after creating such ill-feeling and resentment in the minority community, what thanks do you get from the Ulster Unionists? Do they say, thank you very much, Leader of the House, you've been very good to us, we will vote for you in the motion of confidence tonight? No, they're right there with the Tories tonight. The sheer ingratitude of that crowd knows no bounds. And so, sir, they have used, the Northern Ireland Unionists in this House have used this Labour government for their own ends. And tonight they will try to bring about the downfall of this government. Because seats in Northern Ireland don't change all that often. They know that they will come back with as many seats as they have. There may be 1 or 2 called into question, but the possibility is that they will be back. And they are not terribly concerned with what happens in other parts of the United Kingdom. I believe, sir, that this Labour government is going to win the next election. And this speech which I am making now is an attempt to tell them of the tragic mistakes which they have made over this past 5 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I didn't make up my mind to take part in this debate or to vote on it because of devolution in Scotland and Wales. I made up my mind last Friday, the Friday before that, when I read the Bennett report on police brutality in Northern Ireland. An issue that hasn't received the attention that it should in this House or in this country. Because there is absolutely no doubt what that Bennett report says. That Bennett report says very, very clearly that innocent men were being brutalised and ill-treated in the holding centres in Northern Ireland. It says that very, very clearly. And so, sir, why is it that restrictions were placed on it being debated when we were debating the Prevention of Terrorism Act? Why is it that we have not had a promise that there will be a debate about it on the floor of this House? Because, sir, that is only the tip of the iceberg. And I can tell this House now, we've heard about sort of Watergate and Muldergate. There's going to be a Bennettgate. And when the real true story emerges from what has been happening in interrogation centres in Northern Ireland, the people in the United Kingdom will receive that news with shock and horror and resentment. And so, sir, that is one of the reasons why I am in the position in which I am tonight. Sir, throughout the years and the votes which have taken place, the Hansard pages will tell the story of who voted with me on the Seats Bill, on the Prevention of Terrorism, on the Emergency Powers Act. Right. These are the people whom I regard as the real true socialists on this side of the House. But they were men with a conscience. They were men who had nothing to gain by going into the lobby with me. They were men who were motivated by concern in Northern Ireland. And it has been very, very hard for me to take when I've seen some of my honourable friends on the government front benches taking a diametrically opposed view to me on something which I knew what was happening in Northern Ireland. Someone has told me here today, if you don't vote for the government tonight and there's an election, isn't the alternative twice as bad as what you've got at the moment? I don't think it is. As I say, I want to see a continuation of this Labour government. But if there is a Conservative government return, I would warn that Conservative government not to get carried away with the fact that somewhere around the corner there is a military solution to the Northern Ireland problem. Because that is exactly the attitude that we have seen from my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Every Monday morning he meets the Chief Constable. And every Monday at 1 o'clock on the Northern Ireland News, we read that there were so many IRA men caught, and there were so many of them sent to jail, and there were so many something else, and there were so many. Every Monday he's looking for a military solution. But there's going to be Mondays and Mondays and Mondays and Mondays and Mondays, and there's going to be no military solution until we start to grapple with the political problem that is Northern Ireland. And so, sir, my grievances are very clear. And what is more, they are readily understood, because although there will be not too many of my honourable friends stand up in the House today and say it, they have all said to me, yes, we recognise, we're sorry. Some of them now are beginning to regret that they ever done a deal with the devil in the person of the Northern Ireland Unionists. They're beginning to get, but it's too late now. It's too late. And I find myself in the position, Mr. Speaker, where in all conscience, and an understanding of the real needs of Northern Ireland, that I would be a liar to my own conscience, and I would be a traitor to the people who sent me here if I were to go into the government lobby tonight and express confidence in this administration in relation to its affairs in Northern Ireland. Let me say this. I want to see this government having an election as soon as possible, and I want to see it winning. And I want to see it having such a majority that it will never again have to rely on votes from the Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. But Mr. Speaker, I say this on the floor of the House. Rumours are circulating in this House, and in Northern Ireland indeed, as to the levels that this government will stoop to maintain themselves in office for another few short weeks. I very, very rarely agree, I don't think I've ever agreed, with what the Right Honourable Lady has ever said, but she did say that this government should maintain its dignity. I believe that too. It's heartbreaking to me to see a Labour government without dignity. The Honourable Member, I cannot say that he's my honourable friend. Some people might think so. The Honourable Member for Fermanagh, South Tyrone, is not here today. He's very, very rarely in this House. Very rarely. He has yet to make his maiden speech. He has yet to make his maiden speech. On all the issues that we had within recent months, the prevention of terrorism, the debate on the Bennett report, the votes, the second reading, third reading committee stage of the Seats Bill, the Honourable Member for Fermanagh, South Tyrone, didn't come to the House and give us the benefit of what he thought, whether he accepted or whether he rejected that type of legislation. He didn't appear in the lobby when all these issues were being discussed, but all my honourable friends here, they were in the lobby with me, showing their opposition to that. But there's a rumour circulating in the House today. If it's true, it is despicable that the Honourable Member for Fermanagh, South Tyrone, is somewhere within this building. Talking to some government members or some people from the Whip's office. But he's not going to be able to talk to me in case I persuade him to do the same as I am going to do tonight. I understand, and I will be watching very, very carefully. If the Honourable Member for Fermanagh and South Tyrone goes through the government lobby tonight, then it will be in opposition to everything that his constituents sent him here to do. and it would be a completely dishonest thing to do. Not having been in this House, not having been here today, not having cast a vote on all the issues that I have mentioned, not having made speeches to give us the benefit of what he thought of them. And if this government has to depend on a representative such as that to go through the lobbies in support of them tonight, it's a very, very sad day for the Labour Party and the Labour government when they have to descend to such a level in an attempt. I say to my honourable friends, I have supported them loyally in every way that I possibly could. And I will still do it. I will still be, when the election does come, I will still be clamouring and wishing and hoping and fighting for a Labour victory, in the hope that they will have learned of the mistakes which they have made in Northern Ireland. I would hope that even yet, that this government would say, if there was something wrong in interrogation centres in Northern Ireland, then let the whole Bennett report be debated on the floor of this House. Let there be a sworn inquiry in Northern Ireland. Not a committee where everyone is sitting with handcuffs on them. Not a committee that is set up whose terms of references are so restricted as to make the whole exercise absolutely useless. Have a public sworn inquiry into what is happening, because nothing less will satisfy the people in Northern Ireland. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I want to say this in conclusion. I have a loyalty to this government. I have a loyalty to my own working class and trade union background. I have a loyalty to the whole working class movement throughout the United Kingdom and indeed further afield. But I have a greater loyalty to the people of Northern Ireland who have suffered so tragically over this past 10 years. It is their voice that I am speaking with here tonight. It is their voice that is saying to this government, because of what you have done over this past 5 years, because of how you have disregarded the minority, because of how you have appeased the blackmailers of the Northern Ireland Unionist majority, I cannot go into the lobby with this government tonight.
Mr. Michael McGuire.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I hope the honourable gentleman will forgive me if I don't follow him. I would like to start by mentioning the speech of the honourable member who spoke for the biggest group of Northern Ireland members of Parliament, because I think they are a group that's split into about 2 or 3 separate parties, each with their own leader. But he said that, in effect, that when one reads the newspaper criticism about the government trying to keep in power and the opposition trying to unseat it, they're completely misreading the objects, if you like, of opposition parties and of government parties. And I think he was absolutely right, because it seems to me that what the opposition have done, and I think properly so, and I think our party would have seized the chance just the same, is to try to bring about the downfall of this government. And I think it's true to say that once having had their fingers burnt in the past, they had to wait at least until they were certain that one of the major minority groups of the House was with them. Perhaps 2 were going to be with them. And then they did, I think, what oppositions have to do. I think it could be said that they wouldn't have enough sense to come in out of the rain if they hadn't have seized that opportunity. I also want to comment on what I think everybody will agree was a most moving speech by my honourable friend, the member for Belfast West.
That's right. Yeah.
I think most of us who listen to it, and I take on board the comments of my honourable friend, who said that people from this side of the water, anyway, have a bad record of mishandling Irish affairs. But I think it's true to say that those of us who listened to that speech were deeply moved, because we were listening to a colleague who I believe, on the policies and the party that he represents and the community that he represents, has been, if not shabbily treated badly in some respects. And we were listening to a man who actually I thought was tortured, because his deep instinct is to support a Labour government. And he genuinely felt he couldn't, and I think we all admired the way and the clarity in which he explained his position. I was deeply moved by it, and I'm sorry that he finds himself, though I understand fully how he finds himself in that position. I think, if I may say, I don't want to touch on Northern Ireland too much, but I think it would be true to say that if we still wanted, it's probably too late now, to salvage something, I would ask members if it would not be better if we could have said to my honourable friend, the member for Belfast West, there are disquieting rumours and reports which have been investigated. And if we were looking at this in a distant land at which we had some connection, do we really think in our heart and soul we would have been satisfied at the discussion that's taken place on it so far? I don't think any of us would. And if we could have said to my honourable friend, we will set up the most searching inquiry, which I believe is our bounden duty, and we will remedy those things which you feel can be remedied and don't require any constitutional matter of great importance or bringing any bills, we will do that. I think if we'd have done that a few days ago, it would have been an honourable thing to do, and it may have caused, I don't say it would have caused, but it may have caused my honourable friend to do what I think his deep instinct wants him to do, and that's go in the lobby tonight with the members of this side of the House and anybody else who's going to join us. Now, I want to touch too on the speech of the Right Honourable Lady, the Leader of the Opposition. I think one of my honourable friends made a critical attack on it. He described the change in voice, becoming more mellifluous, less harsh, less strident, and I don't know whether this is so, and I can't say that I've particularly noticed any great change in delivery, etc. I think it was a poor speech given the occasion, and I'm one who probably makes more poor speeches than anybody else, but then I'm not a leader of a great party. I think it was too low-keyed. And I think it's true to say that the Prime Minister won it hands down. I think he could hardly fail to lose it, because I think I can say of my right honourable friend, he's the best batsman I know on a sticky wicket, and even when his case isn't altogether too strong, he's got that great ability which I've described before to him personally, I may say. I hope he likes it. He could make comfortable a man on the scaffold, could the Prime Minister. He's got this... He's got this air of assurance and balance and power. And let's be honest about it, it was Cassius Clay fighting any lightweight or middleweight you care to mention. There was only one winner, and the referee would have stopped the fight after a couple of rounds. But the problem for us is that it's not how they delivered and appreciated in the House, it's how they read. And I think my judgment is, although I've not had time to scan it, that it wasn't a bad election speech, and in fact its purpose, although it was to rally the troops here, those lads are going to be through the lobby tonight like a shot of a gun. But it wasn't so much to rally the troops as it was hoped, and it will be hoped, that it will be read with very deep interest outside. So really, when we condemn speeches, although we appreciate good speeches here and we deplore bad ones, the fact of the matter is its audience was a wider audience than this chamber. And I think it's true to say that so far as we've had Conservative policy explained to us, and I hope this will be critically examined when the election does come, whether it comes in a few weeks' time or a few months, it's got to come in a few months' time, that if I can use a humble phrase, it will be seen, as we have seen in this chamber in the last 4.5 years, that the Tories have no policy really, and that, if I can use a humble phrase, which the honourable member for Southport, I hope, will understand, if nobody else does, the Tories are bragging on a pair of juices. They have nothing to offer, and I hope that when the election comes, as my honourable friend, the member who was questioning the right honourable lady on a devolution policy, that she'll have to deliver the goods, she'll have to tell the people what she really means, and I think then we'll be able to expose them. I want to end on a final note about what is considered to be one of the deals which the government have done to keep themselves in power for another few months. And that is the new scheme which we're going to bring in. The bill has had its first reading. It's now in, one can get it in the vote office. The exact title I don't know, but its purpose is to help many of the constituents, I think, of the honourable gentleman, the member for Carmarthen, and naturally the Welsh Nationalist Party has made a very big deal about this, that it's due solely to their initiative, etc. I want to disabuse him of that, and I want to say that when the miners' scheme was brought in, which as a miner I support, and wish in fact there was a bit more money available, my honourable friend, the member for Whitehaven, was, before he became a minister, most persuasive in trying to persuade the government that there were other groups of workers, and I recognise this as a miner, because bisonosis is mentioned in the new scheme, as well as those who suffer from working in other industries apart from slate quarry workers, that he was insistent that iron ore workers in his constituency were as worthy of consideration as were coal miners, and he was absolutely right. So it's got a long history. And what happened was, and I hope my right honourable friend who is to wind up will explain it in greater detail, because it needs to be explained. As I said in an intervention to the Prime Minister yesterday, I'm glad that he set the record straight. The fact was, we were told to wait, and it was reasonable to wait, for a committee which the opposition had set up to research into these kind of matters and report, the Pearson Committee. But unfortunately, it didn't recommend, because of some complexities, bringing in the type of scheme that the honourable gentleman and I suppose everybody in the House wants. And the government, in the Queen's speech, referred to this, and I think they've moved as reasonably fast as they could. Now, I hope that, as the Prime Minister indicated to me yesterday, that it's born out and is born out of the Labour Party's wish, and it was established for the purpose, to help those groups of people who most need help. And without government help, those miners who have benefited from the government scheme would not have been helped, and neither would the groups of workers that are going to be helped in this scheme have been helped. Because the fact of the matter is, and the honourable gentleman knows this, many of these employers, in fact, he's got to go out, he's got to be out of business, so that the injured workman who suffers from the dust reticulation disease of whatever kind, because he's got no employer to sue, he's helpless. And that's why the government are setting up this scheme, which is parallel to the scheme which they brought in for the mining industry. Because with the onset of disease often taking so many years, and with the time lapse of being able to claim under common law being extinguished, the miners themselves were in a very helpless position. So it needed government intervention there, it needs government intervention here. And I finish on this note. No, I just want to...
I wonder if he is aware that when the Prime Minister made his statement announcing the publication of the Pearson report just over a year ago on March the 16th, I put it to him and he agreed that there were members on both sides of the House who had been concerned with silicosis in quarrymen, and that I told him then that a special scheme would have to be devised for quarry workers suffering from silicosis.
Yes, well, I think what the honourable gentleman is confirming, that it's not something that's just been concocted. It has a long history, and I'm glad he's been able to support me, because I want to disabuse people who will think this was a special cobbled-up deal. It has a long history. It did have a parallel scheme, and it is going to be, I think, somewhat, if not largely modelled on it. There will be a great similarity between it. I want to end on this. I intervened yesterday to ask the Prime Minister if the purpose of the government is, as it should be, to help those groups who most need help, who without government intervention will be helpless. I hope that if not immediately, certainly within the next few weeks, my own particular scheme, which is devised to help a special group of workmen who have been left behind for historical reasons, and I'm referring to that category of all workmen's compensation cases, who are in limbo because of the three categories of workmen's compensation cases, and I'll finish on this note, Mr. Speaker, but it is important to the point that I'm developing about the new scheme the government have just announced. The first category are what we call the severely disabled or totally incapacitated. In money terms, and that's what really matters to me, they are neither worse off nor better off than the worst incapacitated cases under the new scheme. I'm talking about the scheme which came in 31 years ago nearly, on the 5th of July 1948. The second category are those people who unfortunately commuted their claims, often for most miserable sums of money. And I believe one could claim have lost thousands of pounds in the recent past. In other words, vis-à-vis those who are now under the new scheme. I hope that in the not-too-distant future we'll have a look at that, although I realise in legal terms it may be a hornet's nest. But the category that I am concerned about, and what my bill is designed to help, is the category who are known as the latents. It's a term that's pretty well known throughout the land, and they're the group of people who can often demonstrate by loss of limb, the loss of an eye, that they are mutilated and badly injured. But because compensation under the old Workmen's Compensation Scheme was related solely to a provable loss of earnings, which these men cannot prove because it's a very complex case to explain and even more difficult to understand, they will carry their injured bodies to the graves and nothing will be done about it. And what my scheme is designed to do, and I'm grateful that my right honourable friend, who I know is knowledgeable about this, has a deep interest also. Now that the Pearson Committee didn't recommend any change for them either, although they've as big a grievance as any other group of workers, my scheme is designed simply that they will be able to go and have them be medically examined, and the medical board, as under the new scheme, will pronounce on their unfitness. Now, the government are sympathetic, as I would expect them to be. But I believe they've taken the advice of the civil servants. And the civil servants are saying, well, it's going to be very complicated. First of all, how can these people authenticate their injuries? Well, I'll tell the government how they'll do it. They'll do it like most of the miners will be able to do it, through the permanent relief societies who have kept records for over a century. I believe, too, we will be astounded at the way that ordinary people, because they have a burning grievance, they'll do it all the more, will safeguard documents that are often 40 and 50 years old, because sometimes they can come within that category of years. We will be astonished how well they will keep them. And I believe they won't have the difficulty that the government envisaged. But the important thing is this. What we're going to do if we don't advance the scheme is penalise those people who can authenticate their injuries, and no government should be doing that. So I hope the scheme just announced is, if you like, the precursor of that deeper and more searching inquiry we need into those other categories of workmen, which, if no other party will help, this Labour Party was bound and founded to help. And that's why tonight I hope that this Labour government, which I have always supported, not just when it's been politically popular, but I've always traipsed through the lobby, because I wasn't sent to this House for the luxury of defeating Labour governments. My job was to come here and sustain them. And I hope tonight at the end of the day, and I wouldn't bet too much on it. It's going to be like the Duke of Wellington said about the Battle of Waterloo. It's going to be a damn close run thing. And I hope at the end of the day, when the whips come round there, that the lad's on my side. And then the other party will have to wait a few more months before they hope to get their hands on the levers of powers. But as I said at the beginning, then they'll have to declare the policies instead of coming across here and say, well, you are the government, you announce your policies. We'll be able to examine those policies which I believe the public will find wanting and will result in the return of a Labour government with a majority sufficient that we don't have to contemplate any kind of allies that sit on those kind of benches.
Mr. William Whitelaw.
Mr. Speaker, years of experience in Parliament watching the Prime Minister have taught me to look behind the facade and consider the realities. Today he gave some classic examples of his cover-up technique. He waxed eloquent about support, not sabotage. But the Prime Minister knows all about sabotage. He was the man who sabotaged his own colleagues in place of strife in 1969, including the Right Honourable Lady for Blackburn. He was the man who sabotaged my Right Honourable friend for Bexley Sidcup when he was seeking to control inflation in 1974. With his disgraceful incitement of the miners at Aberdare. He made great play about confrontation. But what has his government been involved in this winter? With the lorry drivers? With the ambulance men? With the grave diggers? With the hospital workers? What is his government involved in now with the civil service, if it is not confrontation? Then came the most bizarre claim of all. In answer to my Right Honourable friend's admirably clear and unanswerable exposure of the government's failures, yes, the honourable gentlemen can laugh their heads off now, but they will find that that particular speech listened to on the radio outside will be a very impressive performance. In answer to that speech, the Prime Minister referred to his government's outstanding record of social progress. So the Right Honourable and Honourable gentlemen cheered, do they? With an unemployment record of 600 men and women having lost their jobs every day that their government has been in power. Is that an outstanding record of social progress?
Order! Order!
Sit down!
I must tell the honourable member that he is not to keep shouting like that. It's not fair to anyone who is addressing the House. The honourable member who I was addressing knows who it was, Mr. Whitelaw.
And of course, if that phrase about an outstanding record of social progress meant anything, in reality, and wasn't falsified by the facts, why didn't the Prime Minister put that record to the test of a general election last October? Why didn't he accept the widespread feeling in the country and in this House and put that record to the test now, instead of waiting fearfully for Parliament to force him? Again, the reality of his actions is so very different from his fine words. In fact, last September, the Prime Minister told the country that he saw no reason for a general election at that time. Whatever the considerations behind that decision, there can be no doubt that he was taking a considerable risk as far as the interests of the nation were concerned. He was deliberately prolonging the life of a minority government into the dying months of a 5-year parliament. Inevitably, his government would be working against a background of uncertainty, political speculation, and increasing loss of authority at home and abroad. As he looks back now at these last few months, with the vehemence on the picket lines and the bitterness of the industrial disputes, he must surely have grave doubts about the wisdom of his decision last September. Certainly, some of his colleagues have. It is alleged that on that occasion he was swayed in his final decision by the advice of his right honourable friend, the Lord President of the Council, who apparently, then as now, was in favour of hanging on at all costs under almost any circumstances and no matter what had to be done in the process. If the Prime Minister really did listen to his right honourable friend's advice, that explains a lot. For whenever we look at the policy failures of the government in the last 4 years, we find the advice of the Lord President of the Council well to the fore. Certainly, some of the misguided provisions of the Trade Unions and Labour Relations Act, which he piloted through this House as Secretary of State for Employment, have brought considerable trouble onto the heads of his colleagues in these last few months. His attacks on the independence of the judges have done much to undermine respect for the law and so make more difficult the task of those who are seeking to protect our citizens from the ravages of crime and violence. Above all, there has been his handling of the devolution issue, and in particular the Scotland and Wales Acts. Even in his own constituency area in Wales, his passionate advocacy of the Wales Act was totally repudiated. Only 6% of the people in Gwent, with whom, of course, he is supposed to be so closely in touch, actually voted for it. But, of course, the right honourable gentleman shows no remorse. Not content with leaving a trail of shambles behind him, he is already planning a better future for us all. Only last year, at the Moss Side by-election, he spelt it all out. We offer you, he said, 10 to 15 years of exciting politics in Britain. If you have the nerve and the courage to stay with us. I must say, one sees little sign of his colleagues, either on the front or the back benches, having the nerve or the courage to stay with him now. Quite the reverse. The government has long since run out of both nerve and courage. And this Parliament, on both sides of the House, has certainly had more than enough of the right honourable gentleman's supposedly exciting politics. As a result of the Prime Minister's decision last September, this government, and indeed this Parliament, have drifted somewhat aimlessly through what have been, and everyone must recognise this, some very unhappy months as far as our country is concerned. Now we have come to another moment of decision. This time, the House of Commons has the opportunity, collectively, to tell the Prime Minister that, in the words of my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, enough is enough. It must surely be accepted that if the government were to survive in the vote tonight, we should simply be prolonging the life of the government and that of this Parliament for a few more weeks of uncertainty and doubt as far as our country is concerned. The country would lack any really effective government, as my right honourable friend from Bridlington made clear in his admirable speech. I must say to him, as one who has enjoyed his friendship over a long time and as a colleague in this House over a considerable period, I very much regret that he is retiring. But if this were to be his last speech in this House of Commons, it would certainly be a very fine example of his total integrity through all these years. No decisions, certainly no unpopular decisions, would be made. Britain's voice in the world would be muted. Worst of all, this Parliament, both at home and abroad, would be better off simply and written off simply as a forum for petty election manoeuvring. And of all the speeches I have heard today, and I have heard a great many of them, I must tell the right honourable gentleman that not only on this side of the House, but on his own side of the House, there was a widespread desire and belief that we should have a general election at the earliest possible moment. And I heard a great deal of the time the election speeches of some of his colleagues. And I heard particularly the election speeches of some of his colleagues who will not come back to this House after the next election. And I understood the reason for them. And surely that cannot be good for the value of this Parliament and indeed for democracy in our country, which should, I suggest, mean a great deal to us all. This afternoon, the Prime Minister gave us no clear reasons as to why this Parliament should continue. He did indeed try to pretend that the time might be available to establish and discuss in talks constitutional problems in the United Kingdom. But his record since the devolution referendum must cast real doubts on his sincerity. Of course, the referendum results came as a great shock to himself and his colleagues. Therefore, it was not surprising that they begged a little time for further consideration. But last Thursday, the Prime Minister showed that his only real intention was further delay. Instead of giving the House an immediate opportunity to debate and to decide on the repeal orders in accordance with the Scotland and Wales Acts, he offered all-party talks. Yet such talks were exactly the same as those which he, and particularly his right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, had always scornfully rejected when they had been proposed from this side of the House. What he described as a sham and a shower in February had suddenly become a most sensible way of proceeding in March. As the Prime Minister is tempted sometimes to say, ho, ho, ho. In any case, ho, ho, ho. In any case, how could such talks really be meaningful now under the shadow of an impending general election? As my noble friend Lord Hume put it in a statement last week, in terms of practical politics, nothing can happen before a general election. And that view was echoed by the leader of the Liberal Party this afternoon. when at most there are only 3 effective parliamentary months available before there has to be a general election, that judgment must surely be right. It must be sensible to consider the serious constitutional problems involved in a new parliament, backed with a new authority from the people and some years of life ahead. When we consider the handling of the economic issues, it is the same story. Prices are rising again, and let me remind the Prime Minister that under the last Conservative government, the annual inflation rate was 9.5%, and under his government, it was been 15.5%. Those are the figures, and he cannot dispute them. Those are the facts. Productivity has fallen to ever lower levels and to very dangerous levels indeed as far as the future of our country is concerned. And again, the Prime Minister should not be allowed to forget that this January productivity was lower than in what he describes scornfully as the candle-lit 3-day week. Lower this January, and let him not forget that. In any event, there is a fundamental difference of approach between the economic policies of the two parties and a difference of approach to the economic future of this country, upon which the people are entitled to express a view. We Conservatives believe in the encouragement of free enterprise and initiative, with less government, less state interference, and less taxation, particularly on earnings. The Labour Party apparently believes, with varying degrees of enthusiasm, in more nationalisation, more socialism, more government interference, even including, it would seem, the threat to undermine press freedom with a government newspaper financed from government funds. What can be the purpose of delaying the people's choice between these alternatives for a few more months of drifting government and a moribund parliament? On the important issues of industrial relations arising out of recent industrial troubles, the Prime Minister himself has paralysed Parliament. He refused even to consider the offer of support made by my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, for extending the use of the secret postal ballot, for action on secondary picketing, and for promoting voluntary no-strike agreements in the public sector. Yet there is no doubt that such simple measures would command widespread support in the country as a whole. When it comes to Britain's influence in the world, further delay would certainly be as disastrous, even more so. There are important and very difficult problems to be solved and to be faced in Europe, in the Middle East, with the whole oil problems of which the Prime Minister waxed very eloquent, and I believe rightly eloquent. But they are very great problems which I believe must be tackled in the context of a new government and a new parliament. That is where we differ, not about the difficult problems. The more he stresses them, the more I believe he makes my case for having a general election at the earliest possible moment. And of course, above that, there are the problems of Africa, particularly following the Rhodesian elections. And no one can forget that this government has, as far as that is concerned, and this country, a very special responsibility. We have kept it, we have claimed it, we have to discharge it, and again I would have thought we should discharge that with the authority of a new government backed by a new parliament with a proper life ahead of it. Again, a very strong argument for a general election. In our own interests, therefore, and those of the world as a whole, it is surely essential that a British government should speak with real authority. That it cannot hope to do in the present situation and in the months immediately ahead, leading up to an inevitable general election. Against this background, we have tonight an opportunity to assert the power of the House of Commons in the best interests of democracy. By supporting this motion, we can bring to an end a disastrous government. And a parliament which has nothing more to contribute to the well-being of our nation. In doing so, we should be acting in the best interests of all our people in all parts of the United Kingdom.
Lord President!
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman was good enough at the beginning of his speech to make a few kindly references to myself, and it would therefore be churlish indeed if I did not make some comment upon them. I had thought of beginning with a few remarks on some of the speeches made by some of those representative of the smaller parties, but perhaps I could say to the right honourable gentleman at once that I was especially gratified that he should have quoted quite accurately, for a change, quite accurately the passage which I used at the Moss Side by-election, and so effective were my words on that occasion, and so overwhelming was the force of my argument that a good Labour member was returned to this House of Commons as a result. I'm not saying it was entirely due to my words on that occasion, but it at any rate shows that the honourable gentleman hadn't exactly picked on the most damning of all indictments against me or what I might have said. But as I mentioned a moment ago, what I would like to do first, and I would return later to the speech of the right honourable gentleman and the right honourable lady, what I would like to do first is to refer to some of the extremely important speeches that have been made by representatives of other parties and the smaller parties in the House. I don't know whether the House understands that, of course, it is a House of Commons in which smaller parties have rights, and I don't know why honourable gentlemen opposite should jeer so readily, but certainly it would be most discourteous on my part if I did not reply to many of these speeches. And I refer first of all to the speech of my honourable friend, the member for Belfast West. I believe that all those who heard the speech, and I'm glad to say there were a considerable number of members here present to hear it, I think everyone who heard that speech, whatever his views may be, would have been deeply moved by the speech. I think my honourable friend proved once again what we on this side of the House have always recognised, that he is a man of great courage and great honour, and what he says to this House, I believe this House should always be wise to pay heed to it. I did not agree with everything that he said, of course, about the government and its conduct in Northern Ireland over these years, and I believe that my honourable friend himself, my honourable friend, the member for Belfast West, who is one of my oldest friends in this House, I believe that he too, I believe that when he too comes to review everything he said, he will recognise that there were some unjust comments on what had been done by my honourable friends. Nonetheless, I certainly respect the speech, and of course I would have preferred that my honourable friend could have made a peroration in which he said he was going to come into the lobby with us, but even though that peroration was absent, it doesn't detract in any sense at all from what I believe every member on this side of the House who heard that speech feels about it. To the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, the member for South Antrim, who also speaks for that part of the United Kingdom in this House. I say to him that, as he is well aware, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, made a statement on many of the matters that he touched upon a year ago, or just under a year ago, in this House, and we are pursuing those policies, as we believe, faithfully and properly. And I do not believe there, too, that anyone who reviews what this government has done in this field over this period can doubt the straightforwardness and the honesty with which this government has approached these problems. And I don't believe that those honourable gentlemen who represent Northern Ireland seats on either side of the House can question what we are saying. Now, if I can come to the speech of the right honourable gentleman, the member for Western Isles. And I do believe that he and his party have made an error in the way in which they propose to vote tonight. That is, of course, if they adhere to their apparent resolution. But I must say this to the right honourable gentleman, however misguided he may be in seeking to vote as he proposed in the same lobby with those who are most bitterly opposed to the establishment of a Scottish Assembly, I must say that I think those who listen to him and who've seen what may happen later, they must acknowledge the remarkable allegiance which the right honourable gentleman commands from his followers on that bench. It's one of the wonders of the world. There's been nothing quite like it since the armies of ancient Rome used to march into battle, and it's only now that we've seen the right honourable gentleman in his full imperial guise. Hail Caesar, those about to die, salute thee. That is the way in which he has clearly led his followers on this occasion. Which brings me also to the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the Liberal Party. He knows I wouldn't like to miss him out at all. And here I'm sure I'll elicit the support and sympathy of the right honourable lady, because she and I have always shared a common interest in the development of this young man, haven't we? We follow his career together. We follow. So I'm just wondering, and I'm very glad if the right honourable lady's got something to say on the matter, I'll be happy to give way to her in a second. But I'm just wondering exactly, and I'm sure the whole of the rest of the House and the country would like to know, my right honourable friend referred to it in somewhat other terms a little earlier today, what did happen exactly on last Thursday night? I don't want to misconstrue anything. Did she send for him or did he send for her? Or did they just do it by billet doux, carried by... Cupid has already been unmasked. Cupid, who... one of the first chief whips I've ever seen who can blush. And I say to him... I think he's got every right to blush. Anyone who was responsible for arranging this most grisly of assignations has got a lot to answer for. But that brings me to the right honourable lady, because it is perfectly clear. It is perfectly clear that the right honourable lady, and I've never never in this House or elsewhere, as far as I know, said anything discourteous to her, and I never intend to do so. I do not believe that that is the way in which politics should be conducted. Yes, I believe that. It doesn't mean we can't exchange occasional pleasantries, that's right. And what the right honourable lady has done, and I've seen it, marked it myself, what she is doing today is leading her troops into battle, snugly concealed behind a Scottish nationalist shield, with the boy David holding her hand. It's quite a scene.
say to the Right Honourable Lady, who, I'd like her to smile for once. I'd like her to smile. I say to the... perhaps I could say to the Right Honourable Lady, I'm even more concerned about the fate of the Right Honourable Gentleman than I am about her. She can look after herself. But here, the leader of the Liberal Party, I say this in the utmost affection, but he's passed from rising hope to elder statesman without any intervening period whatsoever. And it is in that grave spirit that I welcome him to these debates. Now, there are some. I hope the House will excuse me in referring to some of the speeches made by the representatives of the smaller parties, and I say this with, I hope, without any boasting. I say it partly because I think of the occasionally mischievous attacks that are made on politicians in this House, and sometimes occasionally on myself. I do believe, in fact, especially in a parliament where there is no absolute majority, it is the duty of the leader of the House to be prepared to enter into conversations with representatives of all parties. Yes, it certainly happens. And I say this, what's more, there is not a single spokesman or representative of any smaller party in this House, I'll come to the Right Honourable Lady in a moment, any smaller party in this House who can say that I have misled them at any single occasion in any conversation that I've ever had with them. And I believe that that is something that assists the House in transacting its business, and I believe that the House of Commons will come to learn that to be the truth. Now, I come to the Right Honourable Lady, if I may, and come to one of the central themes of the speech that she delivered today. She quoted, and perfectly fairly, a book that had been written by a friend of ours on this side of the House, Anthony Crossland, and I hope that she won't mind if I quote from a book that was written recently, published not so long ago, by Reginald Mortling. I don't use this in any taunting term at all, but I do believe that this, what I read to the House now, is a matter of major significance for the House of Commons in deciding about this vote, and also for the country at large in the much more general debate that will take place over coming weeks and months. This is a matter of major significance about the history of our country and what has happened to us over these past 7 or 8 years. What Mr. Mortling wrote was this, and this was his experience in the shadow cabinet, as he said. From the start, there was a tendency in the shadow cabinet to move away from the Heath line of policy further to the right. To this, I was totally opposed. In particular, I could not support the arguments of Keith Joseph, who was inclined to say that all we had done in the government of 1970 to 74 was wrong and not true conservatism. I totally disagreed with this because it seemed to me that Keith was fully entitled to measure himself for a hair shirt if he wanted to, but I was blown if I could see why he should measure me and Ted at the same time. But then he went on. I'm sorry we haven't got the assistance of the Right Honourable Gentleman on this occasion, but then he went on to say, and this is the important part of it, I read that because it is necessary to read that prelude. I read this, yes. He said, I could not help recalling Selsdon Park and the swing to the right in our policies which occurred then, and how long it had taken in government to get back to the realities of life. I feared the same thing was beginning to happen again. That is the authentic account, I believe, of what happened inside the shadow cabinet when the Right Honourable Lady, certainly out of passionate conviction, led her party back to the Selsdon Park policies. That is the reality of the matter. That is what has happened. That is the reason why
The Right Honourable Lady has never been able to succeed in securing a full political, fresh cooperation with the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Bexley-Sidcup, because there is a deep gulf still between Selsdon Park Conservatives and those who learnt, in the words of Mr. Maudling, the realities of life. And that is the fact. And it is not my words quoting the realities of life. It is those who had the greatest experience in that 1970-74 government. Now, some of us believe that one of the major purposes that we must have in politics is to try to ensure that our country shall not again have to live through the years 1970 to 74. And what the Right Honourable Lady is proposing, and what is confirmed by what Mr. Maudling said of his experience inside the Shadow Cabinet, what she is proposing is that we should retread that path again. I say that nothing conceivably more disastrous could happen to our country to that in a whole field of different relations, not only in the field of industrial relations, although that would certainly be bad enough, and although it is the experience in industrial relations which is most branded maybe on the public mind, but in most other fields as well, because of course it was part of the Selsdon Park policy to abandon any support for British industry as a whole. It was part of the Selsdon Park policy to drive us into the common market on the most disadvantageous terms possible. It was part of the Selsdon Park policy to return to the naked, laissez-faire policies of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for North East Leeds. Those are all the policies to which the Right Honourable Lady has led her party. I give her full credit. She does it because she believes in it, of course. And she would, I believe, hardly deny it. Or does she going to deny it? Is she going to try and pretend that on this issue she has some special new policy of her own? She hasn't been very successful in explaining to the House today in this debate what is her special policy for dealing with devolution. Because all she's had to offer on that subject, oh yes, we've made the proposal. What the Right Honourable Lady said in reply to my honourable friend, the member for West Lothian, not everyone here was here to hear it, what the Right Honourable Lady said, if I got it right, I don't want to misquote her, yeah, but this is what it added up to. She said what she proposed was talks about talks. That was what she proposed to do about devolution. And I think that's rather complimentary on the whole, because in fact, what she proposed is to do nothing whatsoever about it. I understand. Good, says the backbench members of the Conservative Party. I fully understand that. And the honourable gentleman on the very backbenches, he shouts louder than any of them. Of course I know that. And what has happened? There again, what the Right Honourable Lady has done in the field of devolution, and I think she's done it also because she passionately believes it, what she has done is to tear up all the policies that were originally put forward by her party, tear up the policies on which many of them fought the general election, and say now we return to a position where she's not proposing any proposals whatsoever, either for a Scottish Assembly or for any form of devolution or for any form of progress in that direction. Now, I say to the Right Honourable Lady, if that is indeed her course, then it has come quite a big circle. I wouldn't call it full circle, because the Right Honourable Lady was never very much in favour of devolution herself. But what she's done is to tear up the proposals. What she's done is to tear up the proposals which her own party had put forward in the so-called right approach not so many years ago, when she said, but in our view, the Union is more likely to be harmed by doing nothing than by responding to the wish of the people of Scotland for less government from the centre. What the Right Honourable Lady is doing is exactly what she was saying a few years ago she wasn't prepared to do at all. Now, we're not prepared to do that, and we believe be over and above the measure that was put through this House as well, over and beyond that, for this House of Commons to say that it was going to wipe that act off the statute book without any proper consideration. We believe that that could inflict very serious injury on the United Kingdom itself and could indeed inflict very serious injury on the Union itself. We believe that this House of Commons ought to pay respect to that referendum, even if it does not comply with the full requirement of the 40% which was included in the bill. And it was on that basis, it was on that basis that we made our proposal to the Right Honourable Lady. It was on that basis that we made the proposal to the other parties, and if we win this vote of confidence here tonight, we will renew those proposals, and I but hope that every section of the House, whatever may have been their preliminary views on the matter, will be prepared to come back and discuss these questions afresh, because otherwise I believe that it is going to leave a real deep gulf and breach between a growing breach in years to come between the rest of the United Kingdom and Scotland, and I believe that that would be a highly dangerous development. So I hope that the Right Honourable Lady and her party will have second thoughts on that subject as well. But the Right Honourable Lady, of course, in her speech today, sought not only to make us forget what had happened in the period in her own shadow cabinet period, and not only to make us forget what had happened perhaps in the years of the previous Conservative government between 70 and 74, she was also seeking, as I understand it, to give a very peculiar impression of the kind of legacy which was left to the Labour government that came in 1974 from the Conservative Party of that time. It's a very interesting thing to notice the matters that they don't mention at all. Not a single word about the balance of payments situation. I don't know whether the Right Honourable Lady regards that as a matter of any significance. I don't know whether she regards as any significance the fact that the deficit in our balance of payments in the year when she and her friends left office was the biggest deficit we'd ever had in our history by far, even bigger than the deficit which the Tory party had left us in 1964. But of course, all that she wants to be wiped away from the public memory. She wants to have wiped away from the public memory also what were the real figures of what was the rate of inflation when they went out, and a rising rate of inflation what's more. There was a rate of inflation of 14% in February, with 15% and more in the pipeline, a prophecy then of 20. We've heard the old parrot cry come from all the honourable and right honourable parrots before, and I dare say they'll do it again. And we'll hear it all through the general election. But it won't alter the fact that they left us a rising rate of inflation, zooming upwards with threshold payments inbuilt to make the rate of inflation continue upwards. That's what they left us, and what we have done is to bring down the rate to less than half of what it was when the Right Honourable Lady and her friends were put out of office before. So that's another of the major aspects of what has occurred that they wish to leave out of the reckoning. But of course, worst of all, perhaps, I believe, the greatest disservice which the Right Honourable Lady does to the country in the way she presents the argument is that she seeks to pretend that all the burdens and problems that we have had, for example, in these past 4 years to contend with, and nobody can say that the storm has not been a fierce one. There's no storm blowing outside, you see. So ignorant are they of the outside world, they think there's only a storm here in Britain. So incompetent and ill-equipped are they to try and put things right, they don't even trouble to know what's happening in the other parts of the world. And when my right honourable friend goes to conferences to meet the leaders of the United States and Japan and elsewhere, all the Right Honourable Lady and her friends can do in this House of Commons is to jeer and to sneer as if those were matters of no significance whatsoever. Moreover, what she does something worse than that. She comes to this House and says that in some way or other this country has been demeaned in the councils of the world during these past 4 years. There's not a shred of basis. There's not a shred of basis for it. There's no basis for it. That's not what the leaders of the other countries say. It's only what the leader of the opposition in this country says. That's not what the other countries say. That's not what they've said about the policies that we have advocated at these summit meetings. So why doesn't the Right Honourable Lady say whether she agrees or disagrees with the propositions we've put at those summit meetings? It's because she wishes to mislead the people of this country to think that there's only a problem here. There's no problem in the wider world altogether. Well, we've had this from the Conservative Party on many occasions before. And, of course, what has happened so often in our history, and I believe it is going to happen again in the coming months when the public goes to the polls to decide the issue, what is going to happen is the argument has to be lifted from the levels where the Right Honourable Lady would have them. The argument has to be lifted to the levels of seeing what is happening to our country as a whole. And anyone who looks to see it can see a very different story from the one painted by the Right Honourable Lady today. It is not the case that we have failed to grapple with all these problems in the past 4 years. Of course, we've started to deal with them. We've started to deal with them even with the limited power that we've had in this House of Commons. We've started to deal with them. We have also, despite all the storms, despite all the setbacks, despite all the hardships, we've carried out major programs of social reform at the same time. And it has been because we were determined to carry out those social changes, those social reforms, those improvements in the social services, determined to carry them out despite all the difficulties, determined to share better the wealth produced by this country, even if that wealth was not as great as we wanted it. It's because we've been determined to do that we've been able to weather the storm and to prepare for other times. So what will happen? What will once again be the choice at the next election is not so dissimilar from the choice this country had to make in 1945, or even, if I may say, in 1940, when a Labour Party had to come to the rescue of the country then. It was on the motion of the Labour Party in this House of Commons that we threw out the Chamberlain government in 1940. It was thanks to the Labour Party that Churchill ever got a chance to serve the country in the war years, thanks to the Labour Party. Two-thirds of the Conservative Party of that time voted for the same reactionary policies that some of them they vote for tonight. And it is in the most difficult and painful moments of our history sometimes that this country of ours has turned to the Labour Party for salvation, and they've never turned in vain so far. We saved the country in 1940. We saved the country again in 1945. We set out to rescue the country from what was being left of it in 1974, and here again in 1979 we shall do the same. I know that
Order. I can't hear what the Right Honourable Gentleman says.
Most of the, I don't know why the honourable gentleman, I don't know why they said it's a shameful, it's a bit, I think it's high time that the Tory party recovered some sense of humour, and even if they've lost everything else. They haven't done very well in the debate. they really ought to have had plenty of practice of laughing at themselves over these recent years, and I think they should make a better effort on this occasion. But I repeat, Mr. Speaker, and I repeat, I hope in your hearing, that what is going to happen over these coming weeks, coming months, is, of course, the British people are going to make the decision, and if the British... And if this debate is any test, and if argument counts for anything, and if overwhelming support from these benches counts for much as well, then of course it's going to be not only a very good election, but a thumping Labour majority at the end. We're quite prepared to have it, but you know, the Conservative Party has always had the idea, because they think that they were born to rule, although I would have thought that the country has been cured of that impression long since. But they've always thought everything must be decided according to the desires and the whims of the Conservative Central Office. Everything else is unpatriotic. Well, we say this House of Commons should decide when the election takes place, and the people will decide which government we are going to have to follow this government. We believe that once the record is fully put to the country, once we have the full debate, we believe we will come back here with the real majority that a Labour government requires to govern for the next 5 years ahead.
This House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The country no? No! I think the noes have it. Hear the lobby. Order. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 310.
Order. The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 310. So the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, now that the House of Commons has declared itself, we shall take our case to the country. Tomorrow, I shall propose to Her Majesty that this House be dissolved, Parliament be dissolved, as soon as essential business can be cleared up. And I will then announce as soon as may be, and that will be as soon as possible, the date of dissolution, the date of the election, and the date of meeting of the new Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, as the government no longer has authority to carry on business without the agreement of the opposition, may I make it quite clear that we shall facilitate any business which requires the agreement of the opposition, so that the dissolution can take place at the very earliest opportunity and the uncertainty be over.
Highlights from the debate in the House of Commons 30 years ago tonight, the night the government fell.